She walked back into his life on a Tuesday morning like she'd never left, except she had. 11 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Caleb Hayes knew the exact number because he'd spent the first 3 years counting. Then he stopped counting and started pretending he'd forgotten. The jacket hanging in the back of his closet knew the truth, though. Old brown leather, her initials faded on the collar. He couldn't throw it away, couldn't explain why. Some things you just hold on to, even when holding on is the thing that's slowly killing you. And then the bell above the garage door rang, and everything he'd buried came walking back in on 2 heels. If this story already has your heart, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this one travels. Hit that like button and stay with me until the very end. You won't regret it. The first cold snap of October hit Hallow Creek like it always did. Sudden, without apology, turning the maple trees along Route 9 from green to a deep, stubborn red almost overnight. People in town said you could set your calendar by it. First week of October, the leaves turned. Second week, someone's furnace broke down. Third week, the Hendersons' dog got loose again and terrorized the entire block. Caleb Hayes had lived in Hallow Creek his whole life. He knew every pattern, every rhythm, every small predictable thing about this town, and he had made a quiet peace with all of it. He was 32 years old. He owned a small auto repair shop on the corner of Birch and 2nd Street called Hayes & Company, which was a generous name for what was essentially a 2-bay garage with a coffee maker that only worked if you hit it on the left side. He had one full-time employee, a man named Dennis, who was 61 years old and talked about retirement every Monday and then showed up again every Tuesday. He had a 7-year-old daughter named Rosie, who wore her hair in 2 lopsided braids and had recently decided that her life's ambition was to become a professional dog trainer, despite not owning a dog. And he had a jacket, a brown leather jacket with faded gold initials stitched into the collar. VL. He kept it in the back of his bedroom closet behind his winter coats, in a dry cleaning bag he'd bought specifically to preserve it. He'd never once, in 11 years, taken it to the dry cleaner. He just kept it in the bag. That was the whole plan. Keep it in the bag, push it behind the coats, don't think about it. He thought about it more than he thought about almost anything else. The morning Victoria Langford walked back into his life, Caleb was lying on his back under a 2019 Ford F-150 with a flashlight in his mouth and grease on both elbows. It was 7:48 in the morning. He knew the time because Rosie had left for school exactly 18 minutes ago, and he'd been counting down the hours until pickup ever since, the way he always did when she was gone. Not because he was a nervous father, he was, absolutely, but he tried not to let that run his life. But because the garage was quieter without her sitting on the stool by the register, eating her second breakfast and offering unsolicited opinions about which cars she thought were ugly. Dennis wasn't in yet. The coffee maker was doing its thing, making suspicious noises that weren't quite gurgling and weren't quite choking, but were somewhere in between. The radio in the corner was playing something low and country, which Caleb tolerated only before 9 in the morning, and only because Dennis had set the presets and Caleb hadn't bothered to change them. He was halfway through diagnosing what he was pretty sure was a cracked exhaust manifold when he heard the bell above the front door. He didn't move right away. Sometimes people walked in by accident, saw the shop was a real working garage and not some kind of boutique, and walked back out. It happened more than you'd think. But the footsteps didn't turn around. They came further in. Careful footsteps. Heels, he thought, on the concrete floor. Not the kind of heels someone wore to a garage. Hello? A voice. Caleb's whole body went still. He knew that voice. He'd spent 11 years telling himself he didn't, that he'd probably misremembered it, smoothed it out into something too perfect in his memory. But there was no smoothing happening right now. That voice was exactly the way he remembered it, a little lower than you expected when you first heard it. Careful about every word, like each one was being selected from a specific drawer. He stayed under the truck for 2 full seconds longer than necessary. Then he slid out. She was standing in the middle of the garage with her hands in the pockets of a long camel-colored coat, looking at a set of tires stacked against the far wall like she was studying them. She had the posture of someone who is used to walking into rooms and being looked at. Not arrogance exactly, more like a person who had learned to take up space correctly. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, dark, pulled back. She was wearing earrings that caught the overhead light. She looked like money, not in a showy way, in the quiet way, the kind that takes years to settle into a person. Victoria Langford was 30 years old. Caleb knew from the internet, from the 3 or 4 times he'd made the mistake of looking her up over the years, that she was now the CEO of a company called Langford Capital Group, that she had been featured in Forbes and Fortune and at least 2 magazines he'd never heard of, and that she had an estimated net worth that had more zeros in it than he could comfortably hold in his head. He knew these things the way you know things you wish you didn't. She turned when she heard him stand up. For a moment, neither of them said anything. He was aware suddenly that he had grease on his forearms and that his shirt had a small tear near the collar that he'd been meaning to fix for 3 months, and that he was holding a flashlight. She looked at him the same way she'd looked at the tires, like she was trying to figure something out. "Caleb," she said. Just his name, like she was confirming it. "Victoria." He set the flashlight down on the hood of the truck. Hey. That was what came out. 11 years, and hey was what he had. A small, complicated expression moved across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite anything else. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here," she said. "I'm always here." He picked the flashlight back up because he didn't know what to do with his hands. "Shop's been here since my dad ran it. I took it over when he retired." "I know," she said it quietly. "I heard." He looked at her. She looked back. "Is there something wrong with your car?" he asked. She blinked. "What?" "Your car. Is something wrong with it?" He gestured at the garage. "This is a garage." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "No, my car's fine." She paused. I was driving by. I saw the sign." "The sign's been there for 30 years. "I know." She looked down at the floor. "I know it has." Cut. He made her coffee. It was the polite thing to do, and Caleb Hayes was whatever else you could say about him, a polite man. He hit the coffee maker on the left side until it cooperated, found 2 mugs that were both clean and unchipped, which was harder than it should have been, and handed her one. She wrapped both hands around it the way he remembered. That specific small thing, both hands, always, landed somewhere in his chest and sat there. They stood by the small table near the window where he kept the shop invoices and Rosie's drawings pinned to a corkboard. Victoria was looking at the drawings. "Your daughter?" she asked. "Rosie." He didn't ask how she knew he had a daughter. In a town this size, everything eventually circled back. "She's 7. "What's her name?" "I just said, Rosie." "Right." Victoria smiled at one of the drawings, a purple dog wearing what appeared to be a crown. "Did she draw these?" "Every one of them." He looked at the board. "That one's a dog. She's going through a phase." "She's got good instincts. The proportion on the legs is actually—" Victoria stopped herself. "Sorry, I took an art class once. I don't know why I'm—" She shook her head slightly. "She's talented." "She is." He looked at his daughter's drawings for a moment and felt the complicated warmth that always came with it. The pride and the fear and the constant low-grade worry that he was somehow not doing it right, raising her alone, that he was missing things he didn't know he was missing. Then he looked back at Victoria. "So," he said, "you're back." "For a little while." She looked out the window at Birch Street. "My mother's not doing great. I came to spend some time with her. I heard she'd been having some trouble." He had heard this, actually, from Mrs. Patterson at the hardware store, who heard everything from everyone and distributed the information freely. "I'm sorry. She's a good woman." "She is." Victoria's voice was careful. "She keeps asking me to stay longer. Every visit, she adds a few more weeks to the request." She paused. "I usually say yes, and then I leave anyway." Caleb said nothing. "I know that's a terrible thing to admit," she said. "I didn't say anything." "You were thinking it." "I wasn't." He drank his coffee. "I was thinking you take it black. You always took it black." She looked at the mug in her hands, then at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not much. Just enough. "You remembered that." "I remember a lot of things," he said. Then, because that felt like too much, he added, I have a good memory for useless details. Ask me anything about every car I've ever worked on. I can tell you. She watched him for a second longer than was comfortable. How are you? She asked. And the way she asked it, it wasn't the question people asked when they were making conversation. It was the question you asked when you actually wanted to know. He thought about Rosie's braids this morning and how one of them had come half undone before she even got to the bus stop. He thought about the exhaust manifold under the F-150. He thought about the jacket in his closet. He thought about the fact that he hadn't slept past 5:30 in 3 years because his body had decided that was just when it woke up now, like it had given up on rest being something that actually restored you. Fine, he said. I'm doing fine. She looked at him the way she'd always looked at him when he said something she didn't believe. He looked away first. Dennis arrived at 8:15, took one look at the woman standing in the shop in the expensive coat, and had the decency to pretend he didn't notice anything unusual. He hung up his jacket, said, "Morning, Cal," poured himself a coffee without being invited to, and disappeared into the second bay to start on the transmission job that had been waiting since Thursday. Victoria watched this happen. "He's good," she said. "Best mechanic I know." "Don't tell him I said that. He'll ask for a raise." Caleb set down his mug. "I should probably get back under that truck." "Right." She set down her mug too. "Of course." She didn't move toward the door. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "It's good to see you," she said finally. The words came out like they'd taken some effort. "I mean that. I know that might be strange to hear, but it's not strange." He crossed his arms, then uncrossed them. "It's good to see you too." It was the truth. That was the terrible part. It was completely, uncomplicatedly true. He wished it wasn't. He'd have preferred to feel nothing, or something cleaner like anger, which at least had a direction. Instead, he just felt the specific, exhausting sensation of standing in front of a person you had never fully gotten over and trying to act like a normal human being. "Okay." She put her hands back in her coat pockets. "I'll let you work." She walked to the door. The bell rang when she opened it. She paused, halfway out. "The coffee was good," she said, not looking back. "Coffee maker's a piece of junk," he said. "You were just being polite." She almost laughed. He could hear it in the small sound she made. And then the door closed, and her footsteps faded on the sidewalk outside, and Caleb stood in the middle of his garage for a long moment doing absolutely nothing. Then Dennis's voice came from the second bay. "You want to tell me who that was, or are we pretending I'm blind?" "We're pretending you're blind," Caleb said. Dennis made a sound that was deeply skeptical, but he didn't push it. Caleb picked up his flashlight and went back under the truck. He thought about her on and off for the rest of the day, which he'd expected. What he hadn't expected was to think about her the way he did, not with the dull ache he'd gotten used to over the years, but with something sharper, something that felt new, which made no sense because there was nothing new about it. She was the same person who'd left. He was the same person who'd stayed. "You've always been good at staying," she'd told him once, back when they were 20, back when staying was still something he chose rather than something that simply became who he was. He picked up Rosie from school at 3:15. She came running out of the building the way she always did, backpack bouncing, braids considerably more lopsided than they'd been at 7 in the morning, a painting in her hand that was still visibly wet. "Don't touch the middle part," she announced, holding it up. "It's still wet." "What is it?" "A horse." She studied it. "Or a dog." "I hadn't decided." "It's great." He took it from her carefully, holding the edges. She climbed into the truck. She looked at him with the particular expression she'd developed over the last year. Her mother's eyes, his own tendency to read a room too quickly, and said, "Did something happen today?" Caleb started the engine. "What makes you ask that?" "You have your thinking face." "I don't have a thinking face." "You have like 4 faces, Dad. That's the thinking one." She pulled her seatbelt across. "Did someone bring in a car that was really bad?" "No." He pulled out of the school parking lot. "I ran into someone I used to know, a long time ago." Rosie considered this. "From school?" "Sort of." "Were they nice?" He thought about Victoria's hands around the coffee mug. Both hands. Always. Yeah, he said. She was nice. Okay. Rosie seemed satisfied with this and moved on immediately, which was one of his favorite things about her. Can we have tacos tonight? We had tacos 2 nights ago. I know. Can we have them again? He glanced at her. She was already looking out the window at the maple trees, watching the leaves. Sure, he said. We can have tacos. But she came back Thursday. He didn't hear the bell this time because he was on the phone with a parts supplier arguing about a back order on brake pads. So the first thing he knew about it was when Rosie, who had a half day and had been sitting on her stool eating a granola bar and reading a library book about dog breeds, said loudly, Hi, are you here for your car? Caleb ended the call faster than he'd intended. Victoria was standing just inside the door, looking at Rosie with an expression he couldn't quite read from where he stood. I don't have my car with me, Victoria said to Rosie. I was just stopping by. That's what my dad's friend did on Tuesday, Rosie said. She held out her hand with the formality of a small person who has been taught manners very deliberately. I'm Rosie. Victoria shook her hand. Victoria. That's a long name. It is. Victoria glanced up at Caleb across the garage. You can call me Vicky if you want. Some people do. Rosie considered this. I'll call you Victoria, she decided. Vicky sounds like a sneeze. Victoria made a sound that was unmistakably, completely, a real laugh. Not a polished one. A surprised one, caught off guard, rising up before she could do anything about it. Caleb felt something move in his chest that he very firmly told to stop. Fair enough, Victoria said. He crossed the garage. You didn't call, he said. I know. I was nearby. I thought... She looked around the garage, at the corkboard with Rosie's drawings, at the old radio, at the specific organized chaos of a working shop. I brought lunch. She held up a paper bag from a place he didn't immediately recognize. There's a new Thai place on 4th. Someone told me they're good. I ordered too much, like I always do. You always ordered too much, he agreed, before he could decide not to say it. She met his eyes. Still do, she said quietly. Rosie had already hopped off her stool and was trying to peer into the bag. Is it spicy? Some of it, Victoria said. There's pad Thai. That's usually pretty mild. I like mild. Rosie looked up at Victoria with the completely uncomplicated assessment of a 7-year-old. You have nice earrings. Thank you. They were a gift. From who? Rosie, Caleb said. What? I'm just asking. From myself, Victoria said. I bought them for myself. My birthday, a couple years ago. Rosie thought about this. That's smart. Then you know you'll like them. That was exactly my logic. Rosie nodded approvingly and turned back to the bag. They ate lunch at the small folding table Caleb kept near the window. Him, Victoria, and Rosie, who ate her pad thai with focused determination and narrated, between bites, a complicated story about an incident at school involving someone named Marcus and a misplaced hamster that was apparently the topic of the week. Victoria listened to the hamster story with genuine attention. She asked follow-up questions. She laughed at the right parts. Caleb ate his green curry and watched this happen and did not say a single word about any of the things he was thinking. After Rosie went back to her book, they sat with their coffees and talked the way you talk when you're being careful. They talked about his father's retirement, about her mother's health, about the town, and what had changed and what stubbornly hadn't. They talked around everything that mattered, and they both knew they were doing it, and neither of them stopped. My mother told me you got married, Victoria said. He looked at her. She did. A few years after I left, she mentioned it. Your mother mentioned it. He thought about what that meant, that Victoria and her mother had talked about him, that there had been a conversation in which his name came up. We were married for about 2 years. It didn't work out. He kept his voice level. She left when Rosie was 9 months old. We co-parent, technically. He paused. She's in Portland now. She comes a few times a year. I'm sorry, Victoria said. She meant it. He could tell. Don't be. It wasn't... He turned the coffee mug in his hands. It wasn't a good match. We were both trying to fix something that wasn't the right thing to fix. He hadn't meant to say that last part. It was more honest than he'd intended to be. Victoria didn't look away. She turned her mug slowly in her hands, both hands, always, and said, "Caleb, I need to get back to the F-150, he said. It's been waiting on me for 2 days. She stopped. Okay, she said quietly. He stood up, cleared his plate, kept moving. From across the garage, Rosie said without looking up from her book, "Victoria, you should come back Friday. We're going to the farmer's market." Caleb stopped. "Rosie, Mrs. Patterson has apple butter and it sells out fast," Rosie continued seriously. "You have to get there early." Victoria looked at Caleb. He looked at his daughter, who was ostensibly very absorbed in her book about dogs. "We'll see," he said, which was, as anyone who'd ever met Rosie knew, basically yes. She came to the farmer's market. She was already there when they arrived, standing near the entrance with her hands in her coat pockets, which he was beginning to understand was just what she did when she wasn't sure what to do with herself. She was wearing a knit hat that looked like it probably cost more than his coffee maker, but fit her like she'd had it forever. She looked, for the first time, less like the person in the magazine profiles and more like someone who actually lived somewhere. Rosie spotted her immediately, pulled her hand free from Caleb's, and ran ahead. Caleb followed at a normal pace and told himself that was just prudent. The market was busy. Saturday morning, last good weekend before the weather turned fully. They walked the rows together, the three of them, in no particular formation. Rosie attached herself to Victoria's side with the ease of a child who had decided something and saw no reason to second-guess it. Victoria let this happen. She bought Rosie a small jar of honey shaped like a bear without being asked. Rosie held it the rest of the morning like it was a trophy. Mrs. Patterson, at her booth, saw them approaching and did a thing with her face that was so transparently meaningful that Caleb nearly turned around. She recovered quickly. She was, to her credit, a professional gossip who understood the performance of discretion and focused on the apple butter. "Victoria Langford," Mrs. Patterson said. "Lord, it's been years." "It has," Victoria said. "You look wonderful." Mrs. Patterson glanced at Caleb in a way that contained an entire conversation he hadn't agreed to have. "Both of you do, together." "We ran into each other," Caleb said flatly. "Small town." "The smallest," Mrs. Patterson smiled the smile of someone with a lot to say and the patience to wait for the right moment to say it. She handed Victoria a jar of apple butter. "On the house, honey. Welcome home." Victoria looked at the jar in her hands. "It's not really home anymore," she said. "Places don't stop being home just because you left them," Mrs. Patterson said pleasantly. "That's not how home works." Rosie, who had been examining a display of small gourds, appeared at Victoria's elbow. "Can I get one of these? It looks like a duck." "It's a squash," Caleb said. "It looks like a duck," Rosie insisted. Victoria bought her the gourd. So they walked to the edge of the market, where a line of benches faced out toward the old park with its October bare trees. Rosie had run ahead to inspect something near the fountain. They sat down. Caleb's hands were cold. He should have brought better gloves. "This town," Victoria said after a while. "It's like it just waits." "For what?" "For everything to catch up to it." She was looking at the park, at the red maples, at the pigeons on the fountain edge. "Everything else moves so fast, and then I come back here and it's just the same. The same benches, the same Patterson's booth, the same—" She stopped. "Same Caleb with his garage," he offered. "I wasn't going to say that." "You were thinking it." She turned to look at him, caught. A small, real smile broke through. Not the careful one, the other kind. "Maybe." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Rosie was now talking to the pigeons, which was a new development. "Why didn't you come back?" he asked, just like that, out into the October air. He hadn't planned to say it. It just got tired of waiting. "You don't have to answer that, but I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I could give you the long answer. The thing about building the company and the timing never being right, and my mother understanding," she paused. "Or I could tell you that I was afraid." He looked at her. "Of what?" She looked back at the park. "Of what it would mean to come back and have you be fine." She said it simply, without drama. If you were angry, that would have been easy. Anger is a wall, you know. It keeps things clean. She turned her hands over in her lap. But if you were just fine, if you'd moved on, if Hallow Creek had kept going without me and you'd just kept going too. She was quiet. That was the part I couldn't figure out how to face. Caleb said nothing for a long time. A cold wind moved through the park. Rosie had apparently made friends with the pigeons and was now trying to offer one her granola bar. I wasn't fine, he said finally. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact, stated plainly. Victoria didn't say anything. But I kept going, he added. That's what you do. He watched Rosie. I had to keep going. I had Rosie, and the garage, and Dennis, who needs someone to remind him not to put his coffee on the engine block. He almost smiled. So I kept going. But it wasn't the same thing as fine. Victoria was very still beside him. Caleb, I'm not saying that to make you feel bad, he said quickly. I'm saying it because it's just true, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with you being back. I don't know what any of this is. He straightened up, squared his shoulders, did the thing he did when something was too much. You're here for your mom, and that's good. She needs you. Yeah, Victoria said. Her voice was quiet. That's what matters. Yeah. Rosie came running back. Dad, a pigeon almost ate from my hand. Okay, that's enough pigeon contact for today. He stood, grateful for the rescue. He held out a hand to her and she took it without question, already pulling toward the next booth. He didn't look back at Victoria right away. When he did, she was watching Rosie with an expression he couldn't name, something soft and unguarded, like a thing she'd stopped trying to hide. She caught him looking and the expression didn't quite close. Apple butter's good, she said. She held up the jar Mrs. Patterson had given her. It's always good, he said. They walked back through the market, the three of them. Rosie swung the honey bear in her free hand. Victoria held her apple butter. Caleb walked between them with his cold hands and his complicated chest and the autumn light doing the thing it does in October, when it gets low and golden and makes everything look like something you're about to miss. She left that afternoon. He walked her to her car, a rental, sleek and too clean for Hallow Creek's back roads. And she thanked him for the morning. He said it was nothing, which was a lie they both let pass. She drove away, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his hands in his jacket pockets. He thought about what Mrs. Patterson had said. That's not how home works. He thought about the jacket in his closet, the brown leather one, the one with the faded gold initials. He'd kept it because throwing it away would have meant something. He'd told himself over the years that it was stupid, that it was just a jacket, that he was a grown man with a business and a daughter, and he didn't need to preserve some ghost in a dry cleaning bag. But he'd never thrown it away. He went inside. Dennis was locking up the second bay, and he looked at Caleb with the particular expression of a man who had many opinions and was choosing, heroically, to keep them to himself. Good day? Dennis asked. Farmer's market, Caleb said. With Rosie, a pause. And someone else? Dennis nodded slowly. He pulled on his jacket. I'll see you Monday, Cal. See you Monday. The door shut. The garage was quiet. Caleb stood in the middle of his shop, the shop his father had built, the one he'd taken over without much deliberation because some things you just absorb when you grow up in them, and looked at Rosie's drawings on the corkboard. The purple dog with the crown, the horse or dog that was still ambiguously either. A new one she'd added that week. 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of a building he recognized as the garage. He looked at the figures for a while. Then he went to lock the front door and start cleaning up, and he didn't let himself think about anything except the order of operations. Lock, clean, check the oil levels on the truck that was due for pickup Monday, call the parts supplier back. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't have saved, but he knew it immediately, the way you know some things before your brain is caught up. This is Victoria. I just wanted to say, the coffee on Tuesday was actually good. You were wrong about the coffee maker. He stood there in the middle of his garage reading the text twice. Then he typed back, the coffee maker is still a piece of junk. You just have low standards. The reply came fast. 11 years away and you're still arguing about appliances. He almost smiled. He pulled it back. He put his phone in his pocket and went back to locking up, but the almost smile stayed on his face longer than he would have liked, and there wasn't a single thing he could do about it. Later, in the back of his closet, behind the winter coats, in the dry cleaning bag he'd bought specifically to preserve it, the brown leather jacket with the faded gold initials sat exactly where it had always been, waiting, the way some things do, with a patience that outlasts reason. The text messages started small. That was how it always began, with things that were going to matter, quietly, through a side door, before you had time to decide whether to let them in. The Wednesday after the farmer's market, she texted him a photo of a pigeon sitting on the hood of her rental car. No caption, just the photo. He stared at it for a moment, then typed back, "Rosie's going to want an update on this. Tell her his name is Gerald, and he seems very confident about his life choices." He showed Rosie at dinner. She studied the photo with the seriousness of a zoologist. Gerald has good energy, she decided, and went back to her pasta. Caleb put his phone face down on the table and told himself that was the end of it. Just a funny photo. Normal thing to send. Two people who used to know each other catching up. Nothing more than that. By Friday, he'd sent her 3 separate photos of the coffee maker in various states of dysfunction, and she'd sent back a detailed and mildly condescending breakdown of what she believed was wrong with it, which turned out to be, when he actually checked, completely accurate. He didn't tell her that. He texted, "Still think it's fine." She replied, "You are a very stubborn man. You knew that already." There was a pause. Then, "Yeah, I did." He set his phone down. He picked it up again. He set it down. Dennis, who had developed a kind of sixth sense for whenever Caleb was doing something he wasn't ready to talk about, said nothing for 3 consecutive days, which was a personal record. Victoria came back to the garage the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and then a Wednesday, which broke the pattern in a way that felt deliberate, though he couldn't have said why. She'd stop in around mid-morning when the shop was past its early rush but before lunch. She'd pour herself coffee. She'd learned to hit the machine on the left side, which Dennis clocked immediately and chose not to comment on. And she'd sit on the stool near the window that Rosie usually occupied on half days. She wasn't in the way. That was the thing he hadn't expected. He'd prepared himself, vaguely, for her presence to be disruptive, some intrusion of her expensive, complicated world into the ordinary machinery of his. But she just sat there. She read things on her phone. She answered emails. She didn't make him perform anything. When customers came in, she stepped back without being asked and didn't try to fill the silence. When he was under a car, she didn't talk at him through the floor. When he came up, she was just there, and she'd hand him the coffee mug if it was nearby, and they'd talk or they wouldn't, and somehow both options felt fine. He noticed things, though. The way she always had one shoe off under the stool, the heel hooked on the rung, the sock-footed leg crossed beneath her. She'd done that when they were younger, too. Some restless habit she'd never grown out of. The way she checked her phone with a kind of braced expression, like she was always expecting bad news and had learned to receive it without flinching. The way she laughed at Dennis's stories, really laughed, not the managed version. When Dennis started telling them, which he did more and more once he decided she was all right, which took exactly 4 visits. "She's all right," Dennis told Caleb on a Thursday afternoon after Victoria had left. "I know." "I'm just saying." "I know, Dennis. She drinks her coffee right, none of that fussy stuff." "Dennis." But Dennis picked up a wrench. "I'm just making an observation." Caleb did not tell him to stop making observations, which Dennis correctly interpreted as permission to continue making them at intervals throughout the following weeks. Rosie's relationship with Victoria developed with the unstoppable logic of a 7-year-old who had decided something. She showed Victoria every drawing she completed, delivered in person whenever their schedules aligned, with the detailed commentary of an artist explaining their own work. Victoria received each one with full attention. She asked about color choices, about the stories behind the subjects, about why the horse in Thursday's drawing had 3 tails. "It's more efficient," Rosie explained, "if it wants to swat 2 flies at once." She never talked down to her. She never did the thing adults sometimes did where they were performing engagement without actually engaging. Rosie, who had extremely good instincts about this, noticed. One afternoon, Rosie showed Victoria a drawing she hadn't shown Caleb yet. Two figures again, like the one on the corkboard, but this time there were three of them. The tall one, the small one, and a third figure of medium height standing beside the tall one. Caleb was behind them, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He saw the drawing from across the garage. He saw Victoria look at it. He saw the careful way her expression shifted. Not away, but deeper. Something going quiet in it. "Who's this one?" Victoria asked, pointing to the third figure. Rosie thought about it for a second, in the way of a child deciding how honest to be. "Someone who might stay," she said. Then she took the drawing back and went to add it to the corkboard. Victoria didn't look at Caleb. She looked at the corkboard, at the drawing being pinned up, at his daughter moving on to the next thing with the easy completeness of a person who had said what needed saying and was finished with it. He turned away first, went back to the engine block he'd been cleaning, kept his hands busy. But the drawing went up on the corkboard and stayed there, and every day he looked at it and thought about the third figure, medium height, standing beside the tall one, someone who might stay. He was 32 years old, and his 7-year-old daughter was clearer-eyed about things than he'd ever given her credit for. The question was what he was going to do about that. The answer, for now, was keep his hands busy and his mouth running on safe topics, and hope that was enough. It wasn't, of course. But that was a problem for later. The thing nobody warned you about, or maybe they did and you just weren't listening, was how a person could walk back into the shape of your daily life so smoothly that you forgot, for stretches, to be guarded about it. He'd had his defenses arranged. He knew what they were. Humor, when things got too close. Movement, always something to do with his hands, always a car to get back to. Deflection through logistics, through Rosie's schedule, through the ordinary and pressing demands of a life that didn't pause to let him be overwhelmed by things. These were his tools, and he was good with them. Victoria saw through every single one. She'd always been able to do that, and 11 years and $1 billion hadn't changed it. She didn't call him on it directly. Not yet. Not in those early weeks of October running into November. But he'd catch her watching him sometimes when he pivoted away from something real with a joke or a change of subject, and the look on her face wasn't impatience. It was patience, which was worse. It was the look of someone who was prepared to wait. The third week of October, she told him she was staying through December. He was under the hood of a Subaru when she said it, and he straightened up a little too quickly and hit his head on the hood prop, which was objectively funny, and he would have laughed under any other circumstances. "You okay?" she asked. "Fine." He pressed the back of his head. "December. My mother's specialist has her on a new protocol. She'll need help getting to appointments. My team can handle things remotely for another month or so." She leaned against the car beside him. Does that change anything?" He looked at her. "Why would it change anything?" "I don't know. I'm just asking." "You should stay. Your mother needs you." He turned back to the engine. "It doesn't change anything?" It changed everything, and they both knew it. She went to help her mother with dinner that evening. He closed up the garage alone, which he did most nights, moving through the familiar ritual of it. Kill the overhead lights in the first bay, then the second, check the locks on the supply room, walk the perimeter, front door last. The coffee maker he unplugged every night specifically because Dennis had once left it on and Caleb had spent the entire following day convinced the building was about to burn down. He unplugged it. He stood in the dark of his empty shop. December. She was staying through December. He'd been telling himself it was temporary, that she'd leave and things would go back to the shape they'd held for 11 years. Slightly worn, but functional, like a couch you'd had too long to replace. He'd been using her temporariness as a kind of armor. This isn't permanent. This is just what October looks like this year. Don't rearrange yourself around something that's leaving. December made the armor difficult to maintain. He drove home. Rosie was at a sleepover at her friend Becca's house. One of the rare nights the house was entirely quiet. He made himself dinner, which was eggs and toast because that was what happened when he cooked without an audience, and he ate standing at the counter because the table felt too large for one person and he'd never fully resolved that. His phone buzzed. "Victoria. My mother made too much soup." Again, apparently this is hereditary. He almost texted back that he'd take some. He stopped himself. He typed, "Soup math is universal. The more people you're feeding, the less it scales. She insists it'll feed 4. There are 2 of us. Your mother was always optimistic." A pause. Then, "She asked about you tonight." He stood there with his toast. "She asked if I'd seen you." Another pause, longer. "I told her I had." He put down his toast, picked it up again, set it down. "What did she say?" he typed. The reply took a minute. "She said good. She's always liked you." He thought about Eleanor Langford, small, sharp-minded, with the particular quality of a woman who had seen through people so many times, she'd stopped pretending she couldn't. She'd been kind to him when he was 20 and didn't know what to do with that kindness. She'd also been the one who told him, 2 months after Victoria left, that her daughter had called home crying in the first week. She hadn't said it to be cruel. He thought now she'd said it so he'd know. He hadn't known what to do with that either. "She's always liked you too," he texted back. "Tell her I'll send soup math documentation if she wants to improve her yield calculations." Victoria's reply. "She's laughing. She says you haven't changed. Everybody says that. It's not the compliment they think it is. Maybe. Or maybe it is and you just don't know how to take a compliment." He put the phone down, finished his toast, washed the plate, went to bed. He thought about the jacket in his closet. He thought, December. He fell asleep later than he should have and woke up at 5:30 like he always did, the darkness outside his window still total, and lay there for a moment in the specific quiet of a house without his daughter in it. A quiet that was different from all other kinds of quiet, slightly too large with all the edges showing. Then he got up and went to work. It was Dennis who told him, on a Tuesday morning in early November when the first real cold had settled in and the shop smelled like oil and space heater and the burnt-edge smell of a coffee maker that had been on too long, that Victoria had come back before. He said it casually. He was replacing brake pads on a Honda Civic, and he said it the way he said most things. Sideways, like he was really just thinking out loud and Caleb could take it or leave it. "My sister ran into her," Dennis said, "at the pharmacy on Main. This was, I don't know, 2 years back? Maybe 3. Caleb looked up from the invoice he was reviewing. "What?" "Yeah, Dennis kept working. "Said she looked tired, said she asked about town, asked about—" He paused. "Things." "What things?" "My sister didn't get into the specifics." Dennis straightened up, hand on his lower back. "But she was here, drove through, didn't stay." Caleb put down the invoice. "She told you this now," he said. "My sister mentioned it last Sunday, family dinner." Dennis picked up another brake pad. "I'm just passing it along." "You're just passing it along." Seemed relevant. Caleb looked at the wall for a moment. At the corkboard, at Rosie's drawing of 3 figures, the third one medium height, standing beside the tall one. 2 years ago?" he said. "Give or take." He thought about 2 years ago. November, probably. Rosie would have been 5. He'd been up to his neck in the busiest fall the shop had ever had, 2 guys out sick and a backlog of work that had kept him in the garage until 8 every night for 3 weeks straight. He thought about all the days of that November, all the mornings he'd unlocked the garage and all the evenings he'd locked it again, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, Victoria had apparently driven through Hallow Creek and asked about things and driven away again. He didn't know what to do with that. He went home that evening and made tacos because it was Tuesday, and Rosie had established that Tuesdays were taco nights with the certainty of someone laying down law. She ate too and talked about a book she was reading at school about a girl who trained wild horses, and Caleb listened and made the right sounds and asked the right questions. And after she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and thought about Dennis's sister at the pharmacy on Main Street and a tired-looking Victoria asking about things. He got out his phone. He turned it over. He put it back down. He thought about calling his brother, Ray, who lived 40 minutes north and was the only person in his family who gave advice without also giving opinions about whether Caleb had handled the original situation correctly. But Ray had a new baby and was operating on 4 hours of sleep most nights, and some things you didn't do to a man with a new baby. He thought about calling his friend Mac, who'd been his best friend since they were 12, and who would absolutely, completely, without question tell him exactly what he thought. which was the problem. He didn't want to hear what Mac thought. He knew what Mac thought. Mac had been telling him variations of the same thing for 11 years, which was that Caleb had never gotten over Victoria and was pretending he had. And while Mac was infuriatingly right about this, hearing it said plainly didn't actually help. He sat with it alone, the way he sat with most things. The next morning, Victoria came in at her usual time, and he said nothing about Dennis's sister or the pharmacy or 2 years ago. He handed her a coffee, she hit the machine on the left side, she sat on the stool and opened her laptop, and the morning moved through its ordinary shapes. But at some point he looked at her from across the garage. She was frowning at something on her screen, the small vertical line between her brows that had been there since she was 19. And he thought, how many times? How many times had she come back and he hadn't known? How many times had she been one town over, or driven past the exit for Hollow Creek, or stood somewhere close enough that the distance was a choice and not a fact? And what did it mean that she'd kept choosing the distance? And what did it mean that she was choosing differently now? He went back to the engine he was rebuilding and kept his hands moving and didn't say any of this. But it sat in him all day, shifting weight, looking for somewhere to settle. The first time Rosie asked about Victoria directly, they were driving back from her Thursday afternoon swim lesson. Rosie wrapped in her jacket with her hair still damp and the car heater on full. She'd been quiet for a few minutes, which with Rosie usually meant she was constructing something. "Is Victoria your friend?" she asked. He kept his eyes on the road. "What do you mean?" "Like a regular friend. Or a different kind of friend." "What's a different kind of friend?" Rosie thought about this. "Like how Becca's mom and Becca's dad are friends, but it's a different kind." She paused. "Except they're not friends anymore. They're divorced. That's actually a bad example." "It is," he agreed. "Is she a good friend?" He thought about Victoria handing him the right socket wrench without being asked because she'd watched him reach for it 4 times. He thought about her listening to Rosie's hamster story with real attention. He thought about 2 years ago, give or take. "She's an old friend," he said. "We knew each other a long time ago." "Do you like her?" "Rosie?" "That's a normal question, Dad." "It's a complicated question." She considered that. Outside, the November trees went by, bare and dark against the sky. "I like her," Rosie said. "She listens. Some adults don't really listen. They just wait for you to stop talking." She pulled her jacket tighter. "Victoria actually listens." He thought, yeah, she does. "She's good people," he said. Rosie seemed satisfied. "Okay, then, can we get hot chocolate? There's hot chocolate at home." "The packet kind?" "Yes." "That's not the same as real hot chocolate." He sighed. "We can stop at Muller's." Rosie made a small sound of victory and went back to looking out the window. Muller's Bakery was on 3rd Street, 6 blocks from the garage, and it had been making the same hot chocolate since Caleb was Rosie's age. He parked and they went in, the little bell above the door ringing. A different bell than the garage, higher pitched, and the warmth of the place hitting them immediately. It smelled like cinnamon and bread and something caramelized. Rosie went immediately to the glass display case. Victoria was at the counter. She was standing sideways, waiting for something, and she turned at the bell and saw them, and the expression on her face did the thing, the quick, unguarded thing, the one that moved faster than she could manage it. Then she pulled it back to normal, or nearly normal. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He put his hands in his jacket pockets. "Hot chocolate?" She held up a paper cup. "My mother's. She said it was the only thing that helped her joints." "She's not wrong." Rosie had appeared at Victoria's side with the inevitability of a small comet. "They have the ones with the little marshmallows," she announced. "I know," Victoria said. I got one. Do you want to share?" "I'm getting my own," Rosie said. "You should keep yours, but we can sit together." There was no discussion of whether this was happening. Rosie had already moved toward the table by the window, the one with the bench seats, treating the arrangement as settled. Caleb looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Caleb. She raised an eyebrow very slightly, meaning, "What do you want me to do about this?" He made a gesture that meant nothing, apparently. They sat together. It was warm in Muller's, and the light was doing that late November thing where it came in low and amber through the windows and made everything feel slightly more significant than it probably was. Rosie drank her hot chocolate with both hands around the cup. Both hands, like Victoria, a thing he'd never noticed until right now, and now he'd never be able to not notice it, and told Victoria about the swimming lesson, specifically about a drill she hated called the butterfly stroke. "I don't understand the butterfly," Rosie said. "You look like you're drowning on purpose." "Some people find it very elegant," Victoria said. "Some people are wrong," Rosie said pleasantly. Victoria laughed. Caleb looked at his hot chocolate. "Did you swim?" Rosie asked Victoria. "When you were little?" "A little. I was better at running." "Track?" "Just running, by myself. When I needed to think." She looked out the window. "I used to run the trail behind Mercer Park." "That trail's still there," Caleb said. She looked at him. "I know. I've been running it in the mornings." He absorbed this. She'd been running the trail behind Mercer Park in the mornings. That trail backed up within 3 blocks of his house. He'd been in his kitchen at 5:30 every morning making his terrible coffee, and she'd been 3 blocks away running through the November dark. "It's a good trail," he said. "It is." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "Town's quiet at 6 in the morning." "Town's quiet at 6 in the morning here every morning. It's that kind of town." She nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then, looking at the window, "I forgot how much I missed quiet." Rosie, who had been listening to this with the attention she applied to everything, said, "Our house is quiet in the morning, except Dad drops stuff." "I don't drop stuff," Caleb said. "You dropped the cast iron pan last Tuesday, and it woke me up." "That was an accident." "You always say that." Rosie licked marshmallow off her upper lip. "Victoria, do you like the mornings?" "I do." Victoria glanced at Caleb, a quick thing, and then back at Rosie. "I like that it's yours before the rest of the day takes it." Rosie thought about this with the expression of someone genuinely processing a new idea. "That's good," she said finally. "Can I use that?" "Use it for what?" "I'm writing a book." She said this the same way she said everything, without any sense that it was unusual. "It's about a horse, but there's a morning scene." "Then, yes," Victoria said. "It's yours." Rosie nodded, filing this away. "Thanks." She picked up her hot chocolate again. "Dad writes things down sometimes, too, in the blue notebook in his desk drawer. He doesn't think I know about it." Caleb looked at his daughter. She met his eyes with complete calm. "What?" she said. "I wasn't snooping. I was looking for tape." He had nothing to say to this that wouldn't make it worse. He looked at the ceiling of Mueller's bakery and breathed through it. Victoria was very carefully looking out the window. "The tape," he said, "is in the junk drawer in the kitchen, like it has been for 7 years." "I know where it is now," Rosie said agreeably. "I didn't know then." Victoria's cup was hiding most of the lower half of her face, but her eyes were doing the laughing thing. He could see it. He'd always been able to tell. He looked at his own cup. He almost said something. He moved the cup in his hands and thought about the blue notebook and the things in it. Not literary things, just fragments, sometimes a sentence, sometimes a half-thought he'd written down because keeping it in his head was too much. He didn't know what he'd expected Rosie to do with that information. He hadn't expected her to tell Victoria about it at a bakery on a Wednesday in November. That much was clear. They walked out together when they were done. Victoria had her cup for her mother. Rosie had declared her hot chocolate the best she'd had this year, and the evening was fully dark now, cold in a way that had teeth. They stood on the sidewalk outside Mueller's, the 3 of them, in the small pool of light from the bakery window. "I should get this back while it's warm," Victoria said, holding up the cup. "Yeah." Caleb had his hands back in his jacket pockets. "Tell Eleanor I said hello." "She'll want you to come visit." "I'll come visit." "She'll hold you to that." "I know." They looked at each other. Rosie, who had an instinct for when adults needed an unobserved moment, had drifted toward the truck and was examining the side mirror with deep interest. "The mornings," Victoria said quietly. "The trail." "Yeah. If I ran into you sometime." She stopped. "I just meant it's a small trail." He thought about his kitchen at 5:30, about the 3 blocks, about 11 years of distance and 1 autumn of choosing something different. "It's a small town," he said. She almost said something else. He watched the almost happen. Then she pressed her lips together slightly and nodded. "Good night, Rosie," she called. Rosie waved at the side mirror. "Night, Victoria." The click of her heels on the sidewalk fading. The cold. His truck under the streetlight. Caleb stood there for a moment after she turned the corner, hands in his pockets, the amber light from Wooler's still warm on the back of his head. "Dad?" Rosie appeared at his elbow. "Can we go? I'm cold." "Yeah." He shook himself slightly. "Come on." She slid her hand into his, still did it automatically, without thinking, the way she'd done since she was a toddler, and they walked to the truck. He held her hand tighter than usual. She didn't comment on it. Later, after she was in bed and the house had gone quiet, he sat at the kitchen table with his actual cold coffee and the blue notebook in front of him, closed, and looked at it for a long time. Then he opened it to the last page he'd written on. The date at the top was 2 weeks ago. The day after the farmer's market. One sentence. He hadn't written more than that. She takes her coffee black and holds the mug with both hands, and it's like 11 years didn't happen, which is either the best thing or the worst thing, and I can't figure out which. He looked at it for a while. Then he closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. Not the junk drawer. The desk drawer. The difference he felt mattered, though if you asked him to explain why, he wouldn't have been able to. He stood at the kitchen window for a moment before he went to bed, looking out at the dark street, 3 blocks from the trail behind Mercer Park. He could see the silhouette of the maple in his front yard, its branches bare now, lifted against the sky. The house was quiet. His daughter was asleep. The coffee maker was unplugged. And somewhere 3 blocks away, or maybe 6 blocks, or maybe already in the small house on Clement Street where Eleanor Langford had lived for 40 years, Victoria was probably sitting with her own cold drink, thinking about something. He didn't know if she was thinking about him. He thought she probably was. He went to bed. At 5:15 the next morning, 15 minutes earlier than usual, though he told himself that was an accident, like the cast iron pan. He put on his running shoes for the first time in a year and went out into the November dark. The trail behind Mercer Park was empty when he got there. He ran it anyway. He told himself he did it for the exercise. He told himself that the whole way home. He didn't see her on the trail that first morning or the second. The third morning he ran it, a Friday, the sky still dark and the temperature sitting at 29 degrees. He came around the bend near the old footbridge and nearly ran into her. She stopped. He stopped. They were both breathing hard. She had a headlamp on, pushed up on her forehead now, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. She was wearing a dark running jacket and her hair was pulled back, and she looked nothing like a billionaire and completely like the girl he'd known at 19, which was the kind of thing that did damage if you let it. "Hey," she said. "Hey." They stood on the trail in the dark for a moment, catching their breath. "You run now," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I used to. Started again recently." He looked at the footbridge. "You're out early." "I always am?" She adjusted the headlamp on her forehead. "My body doesn't understand time zones anymore. I wake up at 4:30, and there's nothing to do about it." "So you run." "So I run." The creek below the footbridge was making its November sound, lower and slower than summer, deliberate. An owl somewhere in the trees, then nothing. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said. She looked at him in the dark. "I know. I was just running." "I know, Caleb." He heard the way she said his name, the specific patience of it, the same patience that had been getting under his skin for weeks. And he looked away, at the dark water under the bridge. "You want to finish the loop?" he asked. "Sure," she said. They ran the rest of the trail together without talking much. Their pace matched without negotiation, which was the kind of small physical fact that meant something and which he actively decided not to think about. When they came back out at the Mercer Park entrance, both of them winded, hands on knees for a moment, she looked up at him. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. He straightened. "Sure." That was how the morning started. It became a thing before he admitted it was a thing. 5:15, dark, cold, the trail. And then the coffee afterward, one of them stopping at the 24-hour gas station on 2nd for 2 black coffees, in paper cups, because nothing else was open at that hour. They'd stand by his truck in the parking lot across from Mercer Park and drink them in the cold while the town slowly came to light around them, and they'd talk. Real talking, the kind that happened when you were tired and cold and slightly oxygen deprived and your defenses hadn't fully woken up yet. She told him about the company, not the Forbes version, the actual version. The years she'd spent building it from nothing, the deals that had almost broken her, the people she'd trusted who hadn't deserved it, the specific loneliness of being the person in the room everyone was waiting to fail. She talked about it with the flatness of someone who had stopped needing it to sound impressive, who just needed to say it plainly to someone who wasn't in the industry and didn't have a stake in how it landed. He listened. He didn't try to fix it or reframe it. He just let it be what it was. In return, without quite planning to, he talked about the years after she left. Not the marriage. He kept that surface level still, out of habit or self-protection. He wasn't sure which, but the other things. The first year running the garage alone after his father retired, the learning curve of it, the months where he wasn't sure the business would survive. His father's heart attack 3 years in, minor ultimately, but not minor in the days before they knew that. Rosie's first year, which had been terrifying in a way that was different from everything else he'd ever been terrified by, because the terror was attached to something he loved that completely and that was entirely dependent on him to get things right. "Were you scared?" Victoria asked one morning about Rosie. The cups were empty. The sky was going from black to dark blue at the edges. "Every day," he said. "Still am, just differently." "What do you mean differently?" He thought about it. "When she was little, I was scared about the obvious things. That I'd do something wrong, that she'd get sick and I wouldn't know what to do, that she'd need something I couldn't give her." He looked at the sky. "Now it's more, I'm scared she's watching how I live and she's going to learn things from it, whether I want her to or not." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "What kind of things?" "Whether it's okay to just stay in place." He heard himself say it. It was more than he'd intended, again, the early morning doing its confessional thing. "Whether that's enough. Whether I'm showing her that you can build a good life in one place, and that's fine, or whether I'm showing her that I just didn't try." "Those are two completely different things," Victoria said. "I know. Staying isn't not trying. I know that too." He crumpled the paper cup in his hand. Knowing it and believing it aren't the same thing. She looked at him. He didn't look back. "Caleb," she said, "I need to get back. Rosie's up at 7. He started toward the truck. He heard her say nothing, which was worse than if she'd said something. That was the thing about the mornings. They'd push up to an edge, and then he'd move, and she'd let him, and they'd come back the next day, and the edge would be slightly closer than it had been. He knew what he was doing. He knew it was running a specific kind of distance while literally running, which was the kind of irony he was too tired in the mornings to find funny. The week before Thanksgiving, Eleanor Langford invited him for dinner. This was not a surprise. She'd sent word through Victoria, who'd relayed it with carefully neutral expression, but it was the kind of thing that required some internal preparation, which he did over the course of 48 hours without telling anyone he was doing it. Eleanor Langford was small and thin and had the kind of eyes that were still sharp in a face that had gotten tired. She met him at the door of the Clement Street house in a cardigan and slippers and looked at him for a moment with frank assessment. "You look like your father," she said, "except taller. Come in." Victoria was in the kitchen. He could hear her moving around in there, the particular sound of someone who didn't fully know the kitchen they were cooking in, opening the wrong drawers, pausing to recalibrate. Eleanor led him to the small living room that looked exactly as he remembered it. The same cream-colored furniture, the same framed watercolors on the walls, the same ceramic lamp on the side table that had been there since before he was born. He sat on the couch. She sat in her chair and looked at him with the directness of someone who had decided, somewhere in her 70s, that there wasn't enough time left for anything indirect. "She missed you," Eleanor said. Just like that, no preamble. He kept his face neutral. "We've been catching up." "That's not what I mean." Eleanor looked at her hands folded in her lap. When she was building that company, the first years when it was hardest, she'd call me on Sunday nights. Every Sunday, And she'd talk about the week, and I'd listen, and at the end she'd always go quiet for a minute. She paused. I knew what she was thinking about during that minute. He didn't say anything. She never said your name. That's how I knew it was serious. Eleanor looked up at him. The things that really matter, she goes quiet about. He thought about Victoria on the trail in the dark, her breath in the cold air. He thought about the careful, patient look she got when he pivoted away from something real. Mrs. Langford. Eleanor. You're 32 years old, Caleb. Call me Eleanor. Eleanor. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything. She settled back in her chair. I'm just telling you something I know. What you do with it is your business. Victoria appeared in the doorway. She looked at her mother, then at Caleb, and read the room in about 2 seconds. What are you telling him? She asked her mother. I was asking about his father, Eleanor said without blinking. You were not. The pot needs watching, Eleanor said pleasantly, and didn't move. Victoria looked at Caleb. He looked back. Neither of them said anything about whatever had just happened, which was, he was beginning to understand, their primary mode of operation. Accumulating things they weren't saying until the weight of them became structural. Dinner was good. Eleanor made pot roast the way she'd always made it, low and slow, and the kitchen smelled like it had when he was 20 and used to come over on Sunday afternoons and eat whatever was on the stove without being asked if he was hungry. Eleanor asked him about the garage, about Rosie, about his father's health. She talked about her own appointments with the matter-of-factness of a woman who had gotten her fear of illness down to a manageable size through sheer familiarity. She complained about one of her doctors who was, in her assessment, technically competent, but personally insufferable. He talks to me like I'm already confused, she said. I am not confused. I have a bad hip and a blood pressure issue, not a diminished capacity for understanding medical information. Did you tell him that? Victoria asked. I told him something in that direction, yes. Was it diplomatic? It was accurate. Victoria looked at Caleb. He kept his expression neutral, but it was work. After dinner, Eleanor went to bed early. She was honest about her energy limits in a way that wasn't self-pity, just information, and left them with the dishes and the kitchen and the quiet of the old house around them. They did the dishes without discussing who was doing what. He washed, she dried, the way they'd done it in his mother's kitchen 12 years ago, when his parents went on their anniversary trip and left him the house for a week, and Victoria had been there every day of it. He didn't say that. He was aware of it, and he didn't say it. Your mom's doing okay, he said. Better than I expected. She has good days and harder ones. Victoria put a plate away in the wrong cabinet, realized it, moved it. The new protocol seems to be helping. Her doctor, the insufferable one, is actually doing good work, even if his bedside manner is a problem. She'll fix his bedside manner. She's working on it. He handed her the pot. She dried it. She told you something, Victoria said, when I was in the kitchen. She told me about your father, Caleb said. Caleb. He handed her the last bowl. She talked about you, the Sundays when you called. Victoria was still. She had the bowl in her hands and wasn't drying it. She shouldn't have said anything, she said quietly. She's your mother. She says what she thinks is important. It's not... Victoria put the bowl down. She pressed both palms flat on the counter and looked at the window above the sink, which showed nothing but the dark of the backyard. I don't want you to feel like you have information you're supposed to do something with. It was a long time ago. I managed. You were crying on the phone to your mother on Sunday nights. I said I managed. I didn't say it was easy. He put down the last pan. He turned, leaning back against the sink beside her, both of them looking at the kitchen rather than at each other. How many times did you come back? He asked. She was very still. Dennis's sister saw you at the pharmacy 2 years ago, he said, and she mentioned you'd asked about things, about people. He kept his voice even. How many times were you in Hallow Creek and I didn't know? A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on Clement Street. 4, she said. He said nothing. The first time was 8 months after I left. I drove back on a Friday night and I sat in my car on 2nd Street for about 40 minutes, and then I drove away. She was still looking at the window. You were working late. I could see the lights in the garage. 8 months? She'd been 40 minutes from where he was standing, and he hadn't known. The second time was when you got married, she said. I heard about it through my mother. I came back and She stopped. I didn't go in anywhere. I just drove around for a while. He thought about the year he'd gotten married. He tried to remember any specific weekend that fall and couldn't isolate one from the general blur of it. Third time was when Rosie was born, she said. I sent flowers to the hospital. I don't know if you remember them. He remembered the flowers. He hadn't known who they were from. They'd been in a plain vase with no card from the hospital florist, and he'd assumed someone from town had sent them anonymously, the way people sometimes did. He'd thought it was kind. He'd thanked a few people and eventually stopped asking. And the fourth time was the pharmacy, she said, 2 years ago. I'd been in a meeting 3 hours away, and I told myself I was just stopping through. I ran into Dennis's sister at the pharmacy, and she told me you were doing well, that the garage was doing well, that Rosie was a funny kid. She finally looked at him. I left after that. Why? She looked back at the window. Because she said you were doing well, Victoria said, and I didn't want to be the thing that made you not do well. The refrigerator hummed. The old house settled around them. He looked at her profile, the small line of her jaw, the tired line of her shoulders, the particular fatigue of a person who had carried something private for a long time without putting it down. Victoria, he said. I know, she said. I know, okay? I know how it sounds. I know I don't get to... She stopped. She pressed her fingers against her mouth for a second. I'm not asking you for anything. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here because I decided I get to have something just because I want it. I came back for my mother, and I didn't plan for any of this, and I... Stop, he said. She stopped. He turned to face her. She was still looking at the window. He waited until she looked at him. You came back 4 times, he said. Caleb, in 11 years. You came back 4 times, and you left every time before I could know you were there. Yes, that's... He ran a hand over his face. He was tired of being careful. He'd been careful for weeks, for months, for 11 years in the broader sense, and he was genuinely, thoroughly tired of it. You want to tell me what that was for? All of that. The pharmacy, the car outside the garage at midnight, the flowers at the hospital with no card. I don't know. Her voice was fraying at the edges. I don't have a clean answer for that. I couldn't stay away entirely. I tried that first, the first year. I tried just being gone, completely gone, building something new, not looking back. She shook her head. It didn't work. So I did this instead. Came back enough to know you were okay, and then left before it could become anything. Become anything, he repeated. I knew if I stayed, I'd... She stopped. What? I knew if I came back and you were... If you still... She looked at him, and the careful management she usually applied to her face was entirely gone now, the whole structure of it. She just looked at him the way she always had when she stopped trying not to. I was afraid you'd still want me, and I was more afraid you wouldn't. The kitchen was very quiet. He had 11 years of things to say, and exactly none of them came to him. He stood there in Eleanor Langford's kitchen, with the dishwater going cold and the overhead light doing the unflattering thing overhead lights do in old houses. And he looked at the woman who had left him, who had come back 4 times without telling him, who had sent flowers to the hospital with no card and driven past his lit-up garage at midnight and gone away again. That jacket, he said. She blinked. What? The brown leather jacket, the one with your initials. He looked at the counter. You left it at my place the weekend before you went. I don't know if you remember. You just left it there. I found it after. Her expression had gone very still. I kept it, he said. 11 years. I put it in a dry cleaning bag in the back of my closet, and I never threw it away. He looked at her. I told myself it was because I kept forgetting, but I never forget things. You know that about me. She knew that about him. He watched her remember it. Why? She asked. Her voice was barely there. Because throwing it away would have meant you weren't coming back, he said. And I couldn't make myself mean that. Even when I was married. Even when I should have, Probably. I could not make myself mean it. The silence between them was different now. Not the careful silence of two people managing something, the other kind. You kept my jacket, she said, in a dry cleaning bag. For 11 years. Yeah. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright in the kitchen light in a way he wasn't going to comment on because he was barely holding his own face together. I'm sorry, she said, for leaving the way I did. For coming back and not... She stopped. For all of it. For being the person who needed to go and then couldn't fully go and never explained any of it. Why did you go? He asked. He'd asked himself that question for a decade. He'd answered it a dozen ways, with what he knew about her ambition and her restlessness and the specific hunger she'd always had for something bigger than Hallow Creek. But he'd never asked her directly. He was asking now. She was quiet for a moment. Because I was 20, and I knew that if I stayed, I'd stop wanting things, she said. You were so steady, Caleb. You knew exactly who you were and what you wanted and where you were going to be, and I was terrified that if I let myself have that, I'd never know what else I was supposed to be. She paused. I thought I had to choose between you and finding out. And did you? Find out? She looked at him with something that might have been the complicated answer to that question, if she'd had the words for it. I built a company, she said. I have more money than I know what to do with, and a penthouse in Manhattan and my name on the door. I'm 30 years old, and I've done everything I set out to do. She looked at her hands flat on the counter. And I'm here, in my mother's kitchen, on a Tuesday night. She looked up at him. So, you tell me. He didn't tell her anything. He stood there in the kitchen and looked at her and felt the specific, terrible weight of something that had been held in a clenched fist for a very long time and was beginning, slowly, to be let go. I need you to stop, she said. He frowned. Stop what? The jokes. She pushed off from the counter and faced him. Her voice was steady, but her hands, at her sides, were not. Every time we get close to something real, you make a joke, or you move, or you change the subject, and I let it go because I don't have the right to push. But I'm tired of it, Caleb. I'm tired of standing 1 inch from the actual thing and then watching you find a way to be somewhere else. He opened his mouth. No, she said, not this time. I'm asking you to just stop. Stop performing fine. Stop making it manageable and clean and easy for both of us to walk away from. She stepped closer, not close enough to touch, but close enough that he could see the small scar on her chin from a bicycle accident at 15, the one he'd been there for. Tell me something true. One true thing, without the joke at the end. The kitchen was very quiet. He thought about the trail at 5:15 in the dark. He thought about the mornings. He thought about Rosie's drawing, medium height, standing beside the tall one. He thought about the blue notebook and the one sentence in it. He thought about 11 years of a dry cleaning bag in the back of his closet. He thought about being 20 and in love for the first time with the specific totality that you could only manage when you were 20 and hadn't learned yet how expensive it was. I kept the jacket, he said, because I never stopped waiting for you to come back, and I couldn't admit that to myself because I didn't know how to live with it and still function. He said it plainly, without decoration. That's the true thing. That's it. Victoria didn't move. She stood in the kitchen with her hands at her sides and looked at him. The whole 11 years, she asked. The whole 11 years. He held her gaze. I got married trying not to. It didn't work. I had Rosie, and she's the best thing in my life, and I don't regret a single day of raising her, but the jacket was always in the closet. Something in her face broke open. Not dramatically. There were no tears, no sound. Just a quiet opening, like a room you'd kept locked, finally having its door turned. I never stopped loving you, she said. I need you to know that. It wasn't that I left and moved on. It was that I left and couldn't. And I built everything I built with the door to it shut, because I didn't know another way to function. She shook her head slightly. You think you're the only one who found something to hold on to? I have every text you ever sent me saved on a backup drive. From when we were kids. I transferred them through 3 phone upgrades. They're just sitting there, on a drive in my desk drawer in New York. He looked at her. That's the most Victoria Langford thing I've ever heard, he said. You backed up the texts. Her breath came out in a rush that was almost a laugh and almost something else. 11 years and you're making fun of my organizational system. I'm not making fun. He stopped. He moved without fully deciding to, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her. He just stood close enough that the conversation was entirely different now, a private thing. I'm saying you kept something too. You just kept it on a hard drive instead of in a closet. She looked up at him. This close, in the kitchen light, her eyes were the exact color he remembered and the exact color he'd tried to forget and failed at completely. We're idiots, she said softly. Comprehensive idiots, he agreed. 11 years, Caleb. I know. All of that time. I know. He did. He felt every one of those years standing in Eleanor Langford's kitchen, the weight of them pressing down and simultaneously, paradoxically, not mattering in the specific way that the present moment made the past not matter. I know. She reached out and put her hand against his chest. Just her hand, flat, like she was checking something. That he was real, that this was real, that none of it was going to dissolve when she looked directly at it. He covered her hand with his. They stood there for a moment. I'm not leaving, she said. I need to say that. I know I don't get to just say it and have it mean something after everything, but I'm saying it anyway. I'm not. I know, he said. You can't know that. I know you. He looked at her. That's what I know. She leaned her forehead forward until it rested against his shoulder. He stood there with her hand under his on his chest and the weight of 11 years settling into something different. Not gone, not resolved, but different. And the refrigerator hummed and the old house creaked. And somewhere down the hall, Eleanor Langford was probably not asleep at all. She's listening, Victoria said, quietly, against his shoulder. I know she is. She did this on purpose. The dinner, the dishes, the going to bed early. Your mother has been maneuvering people since before we were born. Victoria made a sound into his shoulder. It took him a moment to recognize it as genuine, full laughter. Not the surprised kind or the managed kind, but the kind that came up from somewhere real and didn't ask permission. He felt something in himself ease open, slow and unstoppable, like a window in spring. He laughed too. He hadn't expected it, and he laughed anyway. They stood in the kitchen laughing quietly, her forehead against his shoulder, his hand over hers. And it wasn't clean or resolved or the beginning of anything simple. His daughter was at home with a sitter. His garage was 3 blocks away. Her life in New York was still her life, whatever she said about staying. There were 11 years of consequence and complication sitting in every corner of what happened next, and he knew that, and she knew that. But right now the pot roast pan was clean and the dishes were done and her hand was warm under his, and he wasn't making a joke, and she wasn't going anywhere. That was enough. For right now, it was enough. Down the hall, very faintly, Eleanor Langford's bedside lamp clicked off. Caleb noticed. He didn't say anything, but he smiled, the real one, not the managed version, into the top of Victoria's head. She's good, he said. The best, Victoria agreed. And outside on Clement Street, the November wind moved through the bare trees, and the town did what small towns do at 11 at night, which was nothing at all, quiet and steady and entirely itself, the same as it had been and the same as it would be, holding everyone inside it the way a place does when it's the kind of town that gets into people and stays there, even when the people go, even when they go and come back, even when coming back takes 11 years. He walked home from Clement Street at 11:45 that night with his hands in his jacket pockets and his breath making small clouds in the cold air, and the town was exactly as quiet as it always was at that hour, which is to say, completely, the kind of quiet that makes your own footsteps sound like a statement. He didn't feel different. That was the thing he noticed. He'd expected to feel different, some shift in atmosphere, some clean delineation between before and after. Instead, he just felt tired and cold and more awake than he'd been in months, which were 3 contradictory things that were all simultaneously true. The sitter, a high school junior named Kayla, who lived 2 streets over and charged $12 an hour and never touched anything in the house without asking first, was on the couch watching something with headphones when he came in. She pulled one ear free. She went down easy, Kayla said. Read 3 chapters of the horse book. Said to tell you the horse's name is Captain, and she's putting it in her will. She doesn't have a will. That's what I said. Kayla gathered her things. She also asked me if you were on a date. He paid her and said nothing about that. After Kayla left, he stood in the front hallway for a moment in the quiet of the house. He could hear Rosie's particular way of sleeping. She'd always been a slightly loud sleeper, small snuffling sounds that had terrified him when she was an infant and now just meant she was fine. She was deeply under. The world was not currently on fire. He went and stood in her doorway for a minute. She was on her stomach with one arm hanging off the bed and her hair in the remains of the braids and the horse book splayed open on the floor beside her where it had fallen. He picked up the book, set it on her nightstand, pulled her arm back onto the bed without waking her. He stood there for a moment. Someone who might stay, she'd drawn. 3 figures. Medium height beside the tall one. He'd thought, when he saw that drawing, that it was a 7-year-old's wishful thinking. Simple and clear the way children's wishes were simple and clear, without the complicated apparatus of adult fear that got installed around wanting things as you got older. But Rosie had been right in the direct way that children were sometimes right, the way that bypassed all the careful management and went straight to the actual fact of the matter. She'd seen what he'd been too busy performing fine to say out loud. He went to bed. He didn't sleep for a while, lying in the dark, looking at the ceiling, thinking about the kitchen on Clement Street and Victoria's hand under his and the things she'd said. I never stopped loving you. In that steady, factual way she'd said it, like it was just the truth, and the truth didn't require decoration. He thought about the jacket in his closet. He fell asleep sometime after 1 and woke at 5:15 by pure biological habit, the alarm in his body so thoroughly set it didn't need a clock. He lay there for a moment in the dark. Then he got up, put on his running shoes, and went to the trail. She was already there at the footbridge. She looked up when she heard him coming around the bend. He couldn't see her expression clearly in the dark, just the shape of her and the pale cloud of her breath. "Hey," he said. "Hey." They ran the loop. It was the coldest morning yet, the ground hard underfoot, the creek below the footbridge carrying a thin skim of ice at the edges. Neither of them talked much while they ran. When they came out at the park entrance, he stopped at his truck, and she stopped beside him, and they stood there with their hands on their knees. "So," he said, when he'd caught his breath. "So," she said. He looked at her across the hood of the truck. "I've been in love with you since I was 20 years old." She went still. "I didn't stop," he said. "I tried. I tried hard and honestly, and I wasn't pining away. I want to be clear about that. I built a life, a real one. I'm not someone who stopped living because you left." He needed her to understand that distinction, but it was always there. Underneath everything else, it was always there. Victoria stood in the cold morning air and looked at him. "The jacket," she said. "The jacket." "The whole time." "The whole time." He stood up straight. "I need to know what you actually want. Not what you're afraid of, and not what you think you should want, and not the version that accounts for the commute from Manhattan. What you actually want." She was quiet for a moment. The park behind her was dark and still. A car passed on the road 2 blocks over, the only sound. "You," she said. "You and Rosie and this town that drives me insane with how much it stays the same." She said it without flinching. "I want to stop treating this like a problem to manage and start treating it like a life." He looked at her. She looked back. "That's a big change," he said. "I know. Your company's in New York." "I know where my company is, Caleb. I'm not going to ask you to give up what you built. I know that too." She came around the front of the truck to stand in front of him. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now. I'm not asking you for a plan. I'm asking you to stop deciding for me what I can or can't have and let me make my own choices." She looked at him directly. "Can you do that?" He looked at her face in the near dark, the scar on her chin, the exhausted patience in her eyes. "Yeah," he said. "I can do that." She put both hands flat on his chest, the same gesture as the kitchen, the checking if he's real one. And he put both his hands over hers, and they stood there in the cold at 6 in the morning with the park behind them and the first gray light starting at the horizon. "This is going to be complicated," he said. "Everything worth anything is complicated." "That sounds like something you'd put on a motivational poster." "I will throw you into that creek," she said. "It's got ice on it." "I know." He laughed. She laughed. And that was how they started. Not with a dramatic resolution of all things, not with everything figured out, but standing in a cold parking lot at 6 in the morning laughing about a frozen creek, which was maybe the most honest beginning available to two people who had always been better at the real thing than the performed version. The first person he told was his brother Ray. He called him on a Sunday afternoon when Rosie was at her friend Becca's house, and the garage was closed, and he was sitting in his kitchen with a cup of coffee that was actually hot for once because he'd made it in the last 10 minutes instead of the last hour. Ray picked up on the second ring. Ray always picked up on the second ring. He had a theory about first rings, that answering on the first ring made you seem like you had nothing else going on, which Caleb had never understood but had stopped arguing about. "Hey," Ray said, the sound of a baby making sounds in the background. "Hold on." A muffled interval. Then, "Okay. What's going on?" "Victoria's back," Caleb said, a pause. "Back as in back. She's been here since October. Her mom's health." "Okay." Another pause. "And?" "And we talked." He looked at his coffee. "Really talked." Ray was quiet for a moment. Ray, who was 3 years older and had known Victoria from when Caleb first brought her around, and had maintained, through Caleb's marriage and Rosie's birth, and 11 years of various developments, a carefully non-committal silence on the subject of what Caleb should or shouldn't feel about Victoria Langford, said, "How do you feel?" "Like I should have done this 11 years ago." "You couldn't have done it 11 years ago. She left. She came back 4 times. Another pause. Longer. "She, 4 times, didn't come in once." "Caleb." "I know." "That's," Ray exhaled. "Man." "Yeah." "Are you okay?" He thought about it genuinely. "I think so. I think I'm better than okay, which is weird because there's also a lot that I'm—" He stopped. "It's complicated. Everything you do is complicated. You were born making simple things complicated." "Thanks for that." "What are you going to do?" "Try," he said. "Just try. Figure out the logistics later." Ray made a sound that was somewhere between skepticism and something warmer. "Does Rosie know?" "She knew before I did." Ray laughed. "That kid." "Yeah." Caleb looked at the corkboard on the kitchen wall where he'd moved some of Rosie's drawings. The 3-figure one was there, the medium-height figure beside the tall one. "She's been drawing the 3 of us for weeks." "Then it sounds like you're already a little bit decided," Ray said. He was right. Caleb knew he was right. But he didn't say so, because some things you had to arrive at in your own time even when other people got there first. "How's the baby?" he said. "Loud and perfect," Ray said. "Bring Victoria when you come up. I want to meet the woman who had my brother running on a trail at 5 in the morning." He didn't ask how Ray knew about the trail. He'd learned years ago that information in families moved through channels he couldn't track or control, like water finding its level. "I'll ask her," he said. The complications he'd mentioned to Victoria were real, and they arrived quickly, the way complications did when you stopped pretending they weren't there. Her company was in New York. She had a team of 47 people, 2 ongoing acquisitions, and a board that required her physical presence at minimum 6 times a year and her available presence at all hours. She couldn't just live in Hallow Creek. That was simply the fact of it, and he'd known it going in, and she'd known it going in, and knowing it didn't make it not complicated. They talked about it on a Wednesday evening in the back of the garage after Dennis had gone home and Rosie was doing homework at the small desk he'd set up for her in the corner. Rosie had headphones on, engaged in what appeared to be a very serious chapter of the horse book, and was not pretending not to listen with anything like subtlety. "I've been talking to my team about restructuring some things," Victoria said. She was sitting on the stool, coffee in hand, the posture of someone who had been thinking about this for a while and was now choosing to say it. "I can do most of my work remotely. I've been doing it remotely for the last 2 months and the sky hasn't fallen." "How many days a month do you need to be in New York?" he asked. Honestly, probably 4 to 6, maybe 8 in heavy months. He did the math. That's manageable. It's not nothing, she said. I'm not going to pretend it's nothing. I'll be gone sometimes, more during acquisitions. It's not, she looked at him. It's not the life where I'm here every morning. You're here most mornings, he said. That's already more than, he stopped. More than what? He looked at Rosie, who was very focused on her book. More than we had before, he said. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then, I'm looking at the Redfin listings. He looked at her. For what? Houses. She said it like it was obvious. In Hollow Creek. I can't live in my mother's guest room indefinitely. She loves me, but she'll kill me. She looked at the coffee mug. There's a place on Hartwell that has a good workspace setup. Big windows. He processed this. You're looking at houses, he said. I've been looking for about 3 weeks. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a second. You were looking at houses while I was still doing the whole thing where I went running alone in the dark because I didn't know how to say anything. She raised an eyebrow. You came to the trail 3 mornings before you ran into me. You were not subtle. I thought I was being very subtle. You were being very Caleb. She said it without cruelty, which made it land differently than if it had been a criticism, just an observation, just accurate. I knew you'd get there. From the corner, Rosie's voice came, headphones still on. What house on Hartwell? Both of them looked at her. She was still looking at her book. You said you had headphones, Caleb said. I can hear through them if I turn the volume down, Rosie said. She took the headphones off and set them on the desk with the manner of someone who had been caught but didn't feel particularly bad about it. The house on Hartwell with the blue shutters? Victoria looked at Caleb. The blue shutters, Victoria confirmed, carefully. Rosie nodded. Mrs. Patterson's niece used to live there. She moved to Cincinnati. The yard has a good fence. She appeared to consider this. Good for a dog. Rosie, Caleb said, I'm just providing information. She put her headphones back on. Victoria pressed her lips together. Caleb looked at the ceiling. The fence is good, Victoria said quietly to him. Don't, he said. I'm just saying. You're both doing the thing. What thing? The thing where you act like you're not coordinating and you absolutely are. Victoria picked up her coffee with both hands and looked at him over the rim with an expression that was entirely too innocent to be innocent. He looked at his daughter, who was back to reading with the perfect composure of a 7-year-old who had gotten exactly what she wanted and was being gracious about it. He was outnumbered. He had been outnumbered for weeks, probably, and just now arriving at the understanding. He was not, he realized, particularly upset about it. The thing that was hardest in those early weeks of December wasn't the logistics. The logistics were manageable, solvable, the kind of problems that had practical answers if you were willing to work at them. The hardest thing was the residue. 11 years didn't dissolve because 2 people stood in a kitchen and said true things to each other. It left sediment, the way all that time would. Old habits of protecting yourself, old reflexes, moments where he'd pull back without meaning to, or she'd get the managed look on her face, and he'd have to decide whether to let it pass or say something. They had a fight, their first, which felt significant, on a Thursday afternoon, about nothing and about everything the way first fights always were. She'd rescheduled a dinner he'd been looking forward to last minute because of a work call she couldn't move. He'd said it was fine. She'd known it wasn't fine. He'd insisted it was fine. She'd pushed. He'd gotten quiet in the specific way that wasn't quiet at all, and she'd gotten formal in the way she got when she was managing something. And they'd ended up standing in the cold outside the garage in the December dusk, not saying any of the actual thing. Just tell me you're annoyed, she said. I said it was fine. You're doing the thing. I'm not doing anything. Caleb, she crossed her arms. She wasn't wearing her coat and her breath was fast in the cold. I rescheduled on you at the last minute. You're allowed to be annoyed. I would be annoyed. Say you're annoyed. He looked at the street. At the holiday lights someone had strung on the lampposts, which the town did every December, the same lights in the same pattern. He looked at his garage sign, his father's sign. I'm annoyed, he said. Thank you. And He stopped. He pushed through it. I'm scared that this is the pattern, that work comes first and I get the rescheduled version, and I'm supposed to be fine about it because that's what understanding looks like. She went very still. That's what happened before, he said. Not accusing, just naming it. When we were young and you were already somewhere else in your head half the time, and I was here and I told myself it was fine. And then you left and I thought, I should have said something. I should have said it wasn't fine, and I didn't. He looked at her. I'm saying it now. Victoria uncrossed her arms. The managed expression dropped entirely. She looked tired and real and like herself. You're right, she said. I'm not going to do that, this time. She stepped toward him. I know the difference between a call I can move and one I can't, and I should have told you which this was, instead of just telling you I had to reschedule. That was me handling it, instead of talking to it. She met his eyes. I'm sorry. He looked at her for a moment. Which kind was it? He said. The call. One I couldn't move. My legal team had a window with the acquisition counsel that took 3 weeks to set up. She paused. But I could have told you that, instead of just saying I had to cancel. That part was on me. He thought about it. He thought about the difference between someone who was choosing work over him and someone who had a legitimate, unmovable obligation and communicated it badly. He'd spent 11 years with a certain narrative about which one she was, and he was trying, actively, daily, with more effort than he usually admitted, not to run the old narrative on new information. Okay, he said. Okay? Okay, I hear the difference. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. And I'll try not to default to fine when I'm not fine. That's me working something out. That's not just you. She looked at him. The cold had put color in her cheeks, and her hair was doing the thing it did when the humidity was low, the small pieces around her face going their own directions. She looked, in the December dusk outside his garage, like something he'd been afraid to want for so long that the wanting itself felt new and very slightly terrifying. This is hard, she said. The fixing it, not the... She gestured between them. This part is hard. Yeah. He pulled one hand out of his pocket and held it out toward her. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. Her hand was cold. You should have worn your coat. I was making a point. You were cold in making a point. Both things can be true? He pulled her slightly toward the garage. Come inside. I'll make terrible coffee. She came. He made the coffee. Dennis, who was still finishing something in the second bay and absolutely knew they'd been standing outside having some kind of conversation, appeared at the door of the bay, looked at them both and said, That coffee smells burnt. I just made it, Caleb said. Yeah. Dennis disappeared back into the bay. Like I said, Victoria sat on her stool with her coffee and Caleb stood across the garage, and they looked at each other with the specific look of two people who had just done something hard and gotten through it. Not cleanly, not perfectly, but through it. That was December. Rosie adjusted to the new shape of things with the flexible logic of a child who had wanted this outcome and was therefore prepared to be pragmatic about whatever it required. She accepted Victoria's presence in their daily life with the same naturalness she'd accepted it at the garage. Gradually, then completely, with the particular form of love children extended to people who listened to them without performance. She showed Victoria her drawings every time. She narrated her book. She gave detailed opinions about everything from the color of Victoria's coat to the best route to school to whether Captain the fictional horse was a better name than Storm. Storm is a horse name from a movie, Rosie explained one evening at the kitchen table, where the three of them had eaten dinner, a thing that had started happening with increasing regularity. Victoria staying for dinner, or bringing things for dinner, or suggesting they try the new restaurant on 4th that had finally gotten its act together. Captain is original. Storm has a good sound to it, Victoria said. Storm sounds like something bad is coming, Rosie said. Captain sounds like someone's in charge. Can't argue with that logic, Caleb said. Rosie accepted this as the definitive end of the discussion and went back to her pasta. He watched this happen, the three of them at his kitchen table, this ordinary evening thing, and felt the specific, complicated quality of being somewhere you'd wanted to be for a long time. It wasn't easy. Rosie was still a 7-year-old with a 7-year-old's full range of moods, and Victoria was still a person learning the rhythms of a household that wasn't hers. And Caleb was still a man who didn't always say the thing on the first try, and sometimes needed to be asked twice before he'd admit he was struggling with something. None of it was smooth. The pasta was slightly overcooked because he'd been on the phone with a supplier. Victoria had accidentally put Rosie's homework folder in the wrong bag. Someone, no one admitted who, had finished the last of the orange juice without noting it on the grocery list. But they were at the table. That was the thing. They were at the table together, and the light in the kitchen was warm, and Rosie was telling a story about Gerald the pigeon again, apparently a continuing saga she'd been developing for months. And Victoria was listening with the full, real attention she always gave. And Caleb was eating his slightly overcooked pasta and thinking that this was, on balance, the best evening he could remember in a long time. His mother called that week. He'd told her about Victoria. Briefly, the outline of it, enough that she could stop hearing it secondhand, which in Hallow Creek was not a very long delay. And his mother, who had always had specific feelings about Victoria Langford that she'd kept mostly to herself out of a respect for his process that he now fully appreciated, listened to the outline and said, "Good." Just that. Good. "That's your whole response?" he said. "What do you want me to say?" "I'm glad. I've been glad for about 3 weeks, since Mac told your father, and your father told me." He closed his eyes briefly. "Mac, did you think you were going to keep it quiet in this town? Caleb, Dennis's sister, told 3 people before you even had the conversation. How does anyone know what the conversation was?" "Nobody knows the specifics. They know the general shape." His mother paused. "She's good for you. She always was. She was also young and needed to find that out the hard way, which..." His mother made a sound. "Some people do. You both did." Another pause. "Bring her to Sunday dinner." "Mom, just dinner. I'm not making it a production. I'm making pot roast." "You already made pot roast this month." "I like pot roast. Bring her." He brought her, which meant his father shook her hand at the door with the careful dignity of a man who had raised his son to be a private person and was therefore not going to say anything he thought out loud, and his mother hugged her with the directness of a woman who had decided something was good and was acting on it, and his brother Ray, who drove 40 minutes with his wife and the new baby specifically for this dinner, spent the first 20 minutes trying to get the baby to do something cute for Victoria's benefit, and the rest of dinner asking her questions about the company with genuine interest, because Ray genuinely found most things interesting. It was loud. His family was loud in the way that came from being comfortable, us overlapping conversations, people finishing each other's sentences or contradicting them, his father's specific brand of humor that required knowing him to understand, and which Victoria had always understood, which Caleb noticed, and which his mother definitely noticed, and which even Ray paused to register. Rosie, who had come along and who behaved at other people's houses with a formality she completely abandoned at home, sat between Victoria and Caleb's mother at the table and managed, somehow, to be the most socially sophisticated person in the room for most of the evening. "She's going to be terrifying when she's 20, Ray told Caleb in the kitchen when they were getting more bread. "I know," Caleb said. "The horsebook rider. The will." Ray shook his head with something like admiration. "The 3-figure drawing." "She told you about the drawing. She texted me a photo of it." Ray picked up the breadbasket. "She texted me. I don't know when she got my number." Caleb looked at the kitchen door. "She has everyone's number. She's 7. "I know." Ray looked at him with the particular look of an older brother who had been waiting patiently for a long time for something to happen and was now, with studied restraint, not saying "I told you so." "I'm glad," Ray said. "You already said that." "I'm saying it again." He clapped Caleb once on the shoulder. Not a long moment, just a quick thing, the kind men did when something mattered, and they didn't have the language for the specific size of it. "She's always been the right one, Cal, even when the timing was wrong." Caleb picked up the breadbasket and went back to the table. Victoria was laughing at something Caleb's father had said. The real laugh. The caught-off-guard one. Not the managed version. His father looked pleased with himself in the way he got when he'd landed something. Rosie was explaining something to Caleb's mother with the aid of her dessert spoon as a visual prop. He set the bread down and sat back in his seat and looked at the table. He looked at his daughter, animated and entirely at home. He looked at his parents, his father making his father's face, and his mother watching everything with the warm attention of someone who had been waiting for this specific combination of people at her table. He looked at Ray's wife trying to get the baby to sit up. He looked at Ray, who was looking at him with the expression he'd been trying not to make all evening and was now clearly failing at suppressing. He looked at Victoria. She must have felt it because she turned, mid-laugh, and looked at him. The laugh was still on her face, settling into something softer. She looked back at him across his mother's dinner table with the specific look of someone who knew exactly where they were and had chosen to be there. He felt the 11 years. He felt them the way you felt a healed break sometimes. Not with pain, just with awareness. This was the shape of the damage. This is what grew back. "You okay?" she asked quietly, under the noise of the table. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. He meant it. In a way, he hadn't meant it when he'd said it in October to her polite inquiry in his garage, when she'd been standing in the camel coat looking at his daughter's drawings, and he'd been holding a flashlight and saying, "Fine, fine, everything fine." This time it was true. She looked at him for a moment longer with the eyes that were the exact color he remembered, and then she turned back to whatever his father was saying, and Caleb reached for the bread and did the same, and the dinner went on in the way of family dinners when they're working. Too loud, slightly too much food. Someone always on the edge of a disagreement that doesn't come to anything. A baby making sounds in the background. A child narrating something with a spoon. Ordinary, specific, and entirely his. After dinner, he and his father stood on the back porch while the women were inside and Ray was putting the baby down in the guest room. It was cold and dark, and his father stood with his arms crossed the way he always did in the cold, looking at the yard. "She makes you better," his father said, eventually. Not as a question. Caleb thought about the mornings, the trail, the kitchen on Clement Street, the fight about the rescheduled dinner and how they'd gotten through it without either of them performing their way out of it. "I make myself better," he said. "She just makes it worth it," his father said. He looked at the dark yard. "Yeah," he said. His father nodded once, the way he did when a thing had been said correctly and didn't require addition. They stood on the porch a little longer. Inside, through the kitchen window, he could see his mother and Victoria at the sink. Not washing dishes, just standing there, talking. His mother was nodding at something. Victoria was looking at the window, at the dark outside, and then she looked down, and then she laughed again. The real kind. Caleb's father made a quiet sound beside him. "Good," he said. Same as Caleb's mother had said, same word, same simple weight. Caleb looked at the kitchen window. His daughter appeared beside Victoria and said something that made both women laugh. 3 women in a kitchen. His mother, the girl he loved, his daughter, who had known before anyone. "Yeah," he said. The cold settled around them on the porch. Inside, the light was warm. The antique chair had been sitting in the corner of the second bay for 3 months before Caleb finally decided to do something about it. It had come in with a lot of miscellaneous items from an estate sale his father had attended the previous spring. His father had a habit of buying things at estate sales that he described as too good to leave, and then delivering to Caleb's garage because his mother had run out of patience for storage. And it had sat under a canvas tarp in the corner while Caleb told himself he'd get to it eventually. It was a Victorian parlor chair, solid walnut, with carved arms and legs that were structurally sound despite looking like they might not be. The upholstery was destroyed. The finish was gone in patches. One of the rear legs had a crack that would need to be addressed before anything else. He started working on it the second week of December, in the evenings after the shop was closed, the way his father had always worked on furniture. Slowly, without rushing, with the understanding that the material would tell you what it needed if you were willing to slow down enough to hear it. Victoria watched him work on it the first night she came in and found him at it. She stood in the doorway between the bays and looked at him sanding the crack in the rear leg, the overhead light throwing everything in sharp relief, and said nothing for a moment. "I didn't know you did furniture," she said. "I do a lot of things you don't know about," he said. "Hand me that clamp." She crossed the garage and handed him the clamp. She crouched down beside him and looked at the leg. The crack goes deeper than it looks, she said. I know, I'm working from the bottom up. You need to stabilize it before you fill it. He looked at her. How do you know that? She shrugged with one shoulder. My first office? The building was a renovation. I spent 6 months watching people restore things. You learn the vocabulary. She looked at the leg. It's a good chair. The bones are right. He went back to sanding. She stayed crouched beside him, looking at the chair with the assessment of someone who actually saw what was there rather than what it looked like on the surface. It'll take a while, he said. Good things do, she said. He sanded. She eventually sat on an overturned bucket and watched, and they talked about nothing important. Dennis's retirement threats, which had escalated to twice a week now. Rosie's horse book, which had reached a dramatic midpoint involving Captain and a thunderstorm. Eleanor's most recent appointment with the insufferable doctor, who had apparently slightly redeemed himself by correctly diagnosing something 2 other doctors had missed. It was a Thursday evening in December, and it was cold outside, and the space heater in the corner was doing its inadequate best, and the garage smelled like sawdust and oil and the coffee that was always slightly burnt. He was sitting on the floor of his shop working on a broken chair, and she was on an overturned bucket watching him. And it was such an ordinary thing that he had to stop for a second and just register it, this specific ordinary thing. How long he'd gone without it. He didn't say that. He went back to sanding, but he thought it. He worked on the chair for 3 weeks. He stabilized the leg, filled the crack with wood glue, and let it set properly, stripped the old finish, sanded everything down to bare wood, and then began the slow work of bringing it back. He rebuilt the upholstery from scratch. He'd done it before, had learned from a man his father knew who'd spent 40 years reupholstering furniture and had opinions about it that he shared freely. He found a fabric that was close to what the chair would have had originally, a deep green that worked with the walnut, and he put it on right. The corners pulled properly, the piping even. He finished it the first week of January. He brought it to Victoria's house. She'd made an offer on the blue-shuttered house on Hartwell in mid-December and closed just before Christmas, and was in the process of moving in with the mix of efficiency and chaos that came from someone accustomed to managing large logistics, suddenly managing a personal one. And he carried it through the front door and set it in the front room by the window that looked out at the street. She stood looking at it for a long moment. The morning light came through the window and hit the wood at a low angle, and the walnut glowed the way good old wood did when it had been properly restored. Not like new, not pretending to be new, but like itself at its best, every grain visible, every year of it present. It's beautiful, she said. It was always beautiful, he said. It just needed some work. She looked at him. He looked at the chair. Did you plan that sentence? She asked. Little bit, he admitted. She shook her head, but she was smiling, the real one. She reached out and touched the carved arm of the chair, ran her finger along the line of it. You restored it instead of replacing it, she said quietly. It would have been easier to replace it. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. But it wouldn't have been this chair. She was quiet for a moment. The morning light did its thing with the wood. Thank you, she said. Not for the chair specifically. He understood that. You're welcome, he said. Not for the chair specifically. She understood that too. The house on Hartwell was 3 blocks from his house, which was either a coincidence or wasn't, depending on how you felt about the way things arranged themselves when people finally stopped standing in their own way. It had the big windows Victoria had mentioned, a workspace on the 2nd floor that worked well for her setup, a yard with the good fence Rosie had noted, and a kitchen that was slightly smaller than ideal but which Eleanor had declared acceptable, which was the relevant standard. Eleanor came to see the house the weekend Victoria moved in. She walked through each room with her cane and the sharp-eyed assessment of a woman who had lived in one house for 40 years and had opinions about how houses should work. She declared the front room good, the workspace excellent, the kitchen manageable, and the backyard better than she'd expected. The chair's right, she told Victoria, stopping in front of it by the window. Caleb made it, Victoria said. Eleanor looked at the chair for another moment. He restored it, she said. Yes. Eleanor nodded once with the expression of someone who understood the full range of what was being said and found it satisfactory, and moved on to inspect the kitchen cabinets. Rosie's verdict on the house was delivered during her first official visit, which she treated with the gravity of an inspection. She went room by room with the thoroughness of a small contractor, knocked on a wall for no clear reason, looked out every window, and finally came to stand in the backyard and assess the fence. "It's a good fence," she said. 6 feet. That's regulation." "Regulation for what?" Victoria asked. "Dogs." Rosie looked at her. "If you got a dog—" "Hypothetically." "Rosie," Caleb said, "I'm speaking hypothetically." "You've said the word hypothetically twice in the last month, and both times you meant the opposite." Rosie looked at the fence with studied neutrality. "I'm just saying the infrastructure is there." Victoria looked at Caleb. He looked back at her with an expression that communicated clearly that this was her problem now too. Welcome to it. "We can talk about hypotheticals later," Victoria said. "Okay." Rosie filed this away. She turned back to the yard, satisfied. "I like this house," she announced. "It feels right." And that was that. Rosie's approval, once given, was complete and unconditional. She began showing up at the house on Hartwell with the same naturalness she'd shown at the garage. Not every day, but with a regularity that made it part of the shape of the week. She'd come after school when Caleb was working late. She'd bring the horse book and read on the couch in the front room. She'd show Victoria new drawings, including a new series she'd started about a girl and her dog that she was calling, without any apparent awareness of subtlety, the dog she always wanted. Victoria framed the first one in the series and put it up in the workspace. Rosie didn't mention this, but she noticed it, and the noticing was visible in the particular way she stood slightly straighter the next time she came in and saw it there. The thing about the jacket happened on a Saturday morning in January. Victoria was at Caleb's house. She'd come for breakfast, which had become a Saturday thing, less because it was declared and more because it had simply kept happening, and she was helping Rosie with the braids. Rosie had decided that she wanted her braids done differently, and had found a video about it and was providing instruction while Victoria worked through it at the kitchen table. Caleb was making eggs. He was bad at eggs when he had an audience, which Rosie had pointed out several times, so he was focused. "You're pulling the left side too tight," Rosie said. "I can see that," Victoria said. "Hold still." "I am holding still." "You're talking. Talking is moving." "Talking is using my mouth, not my head." "Your head moves when you talk." Rosie was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. "That's actually true," she admitted. Caleb scrambled the eggs. He plated them. He carried them to the table and went back to the bedroom to find his phone and charger. And he opened the closet to grab his sweater, and he stood in front of the closet for a moment. The dry cleaning bag was where it had always been, behind the winter coats. He reached past the coats and took it down. He held it for a moment. The plastic crinkled in his hands. The same plastic bag he'd bought specifically, 11 years ago, and which had been doing its preserving work in the dark this whole time. He unzipped the bag. He took out the jacket. It was exactly as he remembered. Brown leather, worn soft in the right places, the collar slightly turned. The gold initials on the inside, VL, faded but still there. It still smelled faintly of her, or maybe that was his memory supplying something that wasn't there anymore. He couldn't be sure. He carried it to the kitchen. Victoria was finishing the second braid. Rosie was enduring the final stages with the patience of someone who could see the finish line. Neither of them noticed him come back in immediately. He set the jacket on the back of Victoria's chair. She felt it before she saw it, the slight weight of it over her shoulder. She looked down. Her hands went still in Rosie's hair. She turned. She looked at the jacket. She looked at him. He stood by the table with his hands in his pockets. "It should come out of the closet," he said simply. "It belongs with you." She reached up and touched the collar. The gold initials. Her fingers found the VL and stayed there. Rosie, who had turned to see what the silence was about, looked at the jacket and then at her father and then at Victoria, and read whatever was in the room with the accuracy she'd always had. She turned back forward and looked at the wall and gave them the moment, which was, for a 7-year-old, an extraordinary act of grace. Victoria stood up. She held the jacket for a moment, both hands looking at it. Then she put it on. It was too big, the way it had always been. She'd been wearing it borrowed, always, the sleeves slightly long, the shoulder slightly wide. She looked down at it and then up at him with the expression he'd been seeing more of lately, the one that had stopped being managed and was just her face, just the actual thing, open and without armor. 11 years in a dry cleaning bag, she said. Kept it in good shape, he said. You are such a... She stopped. She stepped forward and put both arms around him, the leather jacket creaking slightly with the movement, and he wrapped his arms around her and they stood in his kitchen in the January morning with his eggs getting cold on the table, Rosie said from her chair without turning around. The eggs are getting cold. I know, Caleb said, into the top of Victoria's head. We can microwave them, Victoria said, into his shoulder. We're not microwaving eggs, Caleb said. Then you should let go, Rosie said reasonably. He let go. Victoria straightened up, still wearing the jacket. She looked at Rosie's braids, one finished, one half done. Sit, she told Rosie. Rosie sat. Victoria went back to the braids. Caleb reheated the eggs on the stove because he was not microwaving eggs. That was a line. And Saturday morning in the kitchen on Birch Street went on. Eggs and braids and the January light and the old leather jacket on Victoria's shoulders like it had never been anywhere else. There's a particular thing that happens when you stop lying to yourself about what you want. It doesn't feel like relief exactly. It's more complicated than that, because the wanting comes with all its attendant fear and difficulty and uncertainty still attached. You don't get to want the thing cleanly. You get to want it with everything that wanting it costs you, which is a different thing and a harder one. Caleb had spent 11 years wanting something he'd told himself he'd given up. The habit of telling himself that had gotten very deep. Even now, even with Victoria 3 blocks away and her jacket off his closet shelf and her hands doing his daughter's braids at his kitchen table, he'd catch himself bracing sometimes, waiting for the thing that would make this not real, waiting to wake up from it or for it to dissolve the way things did when you'd been constructing them in your imagination for too long. It didn't dissolve. What it did was become ordinary in the best sense. Real in the way that real things were real, meaning sometimes inconvenient, sometimes unglamorous, frequently interrupted by the actual demands of actual life. Victoria had 3 bad weeks in February when an acquisition went sideways, and she was on calls until midnight and existed for several days primarily as a tense voice coming from the second floor of the Hartwell house. Caleb had a week in March when 2 of his regular mechanics were out sick, and he was covering the work of 3 people and came home every night with his back hurting and his patience at its limit. Rosie went through a phase of spectacular bedtime resistance for about 3 weeks in January that made both adults look at each other across the kitchen with the shared expression of people trying very hard not to laugh, while simultaneously not losing their authority. None of it was smooth. None of it was the performed version of itself. It was just people choosing each other through the ordinary difficulty of days, which was the only kind of choosing that actually meant anything. Dennis retired in February. He'd been threatening it for so long that when he actually did it, Caleb wasn't sure he believed it until the retirement party, which was held at the garage one Friday evening and attended by most of the people who mattered in Hallow Creek, and involved a cake that said, "Finally, Dennis on it" in blue frosting, which was Victoria's idea and which Dennis laughed at for a full minute. Dennis shook Caleb's hand at the end of the evening with the grip of a man who was saying more than goodbye. "You did good, Cal," Dennis said. "The garage did good," Caleb said. "That's not what I mean." Dennis looked across the garage where Victoria was talking to Mrs. Patterson and Rosie was showing someone her latest drawing. "I mean, you did good." He patted Caleb's shoulder once. "Took you long enough." "Everyone keeps saying that." "Because it's true." Dennis pulled on his jacket. "I'll come in sometimes. When you need a hand." "I know you will. I'm not doing it for free." "I know that too." Dennis left. The party wound down. People drifted out into the February cold, their voices fading on Birch Street. Caleb's parents left. Ray and his wife left, the baby asleep in the car seat. Mrs. Patterson, who had very clearly clocked every detail of the evening for future distribution, left with the satisfied expression of someone whose long-held predictions had been comprehensively confirmed. Rosie fell asleep on the couch in the office around 9, her horse book open on her chest, finally on the last chapter. He covered her with his jacket. Victoria was cleaning up at the folding table, collecting paper plates. He came and stood beside her and took the plates. "Go sit," he said. "I'm helping." "You've been helping all evening. Go sit." She looked at him for a moment, then went and sat on the stool by the window. Her stool, the one she'd occupied since October, the one Rosie had immediately claimed as hers by proxy, and which was now just implicitly understood to belong to whoever needed it. She sat there in the quiet of the mostly cleaned-up garage with the cold February night outside, and the sleeping child in the office, and looked at him moving around the space with the comfort of someone who had always known exactly where everything went. "Dennis is going to be okay," she said. "He'll be back in 2 weeks. He can't help it. He found the last trash bag and tied it off. He's already texted me twice about a job that just needs an hour." Classic. He set the trash bag down. He looked at the corkboard, which had become a dense record of the last several months. Rosie's drawings, but also a photo someone had taken at the farmer's market. A schedule Caleb had written and then rewritten. A note in Victoria's handwriting about a part she'd ordered when he was on the phone. The kind of administrative artifact of a shared life that accumulated without planning. He looked at it for a moment. "You know what I've been thinking about," he said. "Tell me," she said. He turned around and leaned against the workbench. "When you left. When you were 20. He looked at the floor for a second, then at her. "I used to think, for a long time I thought that was the thing that had broken something, that there was a version of us that got broken when you left and couldn't be repaired." He paused. "I don't think that anymore." She was quiet on her stool. "I think we were 20, he said, "and we weren't ready, and you needed to go and find out who you were, and I needed to, I don't know, I needed to build something of my own too, the garage and Rosie and all of it. I needed to become someone who could actually, oh," he stopped, looked for the word. "Hold this, without making it about all the time we lost." She looked at him with the open face. The real one. "I'm not glad we lost 11 years, he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not doing the thing where you tell yourself the pain was necessary so it doesn't hurt. It hurt." He met her eyes. "But I think we're better at this now, both of us, than we would have been at 20. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "I think about who I would have been if I'd stayed," she said. "Sometimes, not with regret, just," she shook her head, "I think I would have been smaller, not because of you, but because I hadn't figured out yet what I was capable of. And I needed to know that." She looked at her hands. "And I think I would have made you smaller too, without meaning to, because I was restless, and I didn't know how to stop being restless, and that would have come out sideways at everything around me." "Yeah," he said. "I'm not restless anymore," she said. She looked up at him. "Or I am, but it's different. It's the kind that makes you work harder at things, not the kind that makes you need to leave them." He looked at her sitting on the stool in the quiet of his garage. The leather jacket, her jacket, his closet, no longer, over the back of the stool. "I know," he said. He crossed the garage and stood in front of her. She looked up at him. "I'm not waiting anymore," he said. I'm not in the position I was in, of waiting for something that might not come back." He held her gaze. "You're here. That's different from everything before." She reached out and took his hand. "I'm here," she said, like a fact, like something that had been true for a while and was going to keep being true. He held her hand. The garage was quiet around them, the February dark outside the windows, the sleeping child in the office, the corkboard with its accumulated record of a shared life coming together in ordinary increments. "I want to ask you something," he said. Her expression shifted slightly, attention sharpening. "It's not—" He paused. "I'm not asking anything that requires a plan right now. I just want to ask." He looked at her hand in his. "Do you want this? All of it. The garage and the trail and Hollow Creek and Sunday dinners at my parents' and Rosie's drawings, and the hypothetical dog and whatever it looks like to build something real here. Do you want it?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. "The commute," he said. "The days you have to be in New York, the calls at midnight. Yes, it's not going to be simple. Nothing I've wanted has ever been simple." She said it plainly. "I know how to work at things. That's maybe the one thing 11 years of building something definitely taught me." She looked at him. "I know how to do hard things. For a long time I was doing them alone." A pause. "I don't want to do them alone anymore." He looked at her. He thought about the trail in the dark, the coffee and paper cups, the kitchen at Clement Street and her hand flat on his chest, the jacket in the dry cleaning bag, the blue notebook sentence that had been true for longer than he'd admitted, the chair by the window of the Hartwell house with the winter light on the walnut. He thought about being 20 years old and in love for the first time and not knowing yet what it cost. He thought about being 32 and knowing exactly what it cost and choosing it anyway. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He sat down on the stool beside her, Dennis's stool, the old one, and they sat together in the quiet of the closed garage on a February night, her hand in his, and didn't need to say anything else about it. That was enough. That was exactly enough. Rosie woke up around 10 with her hair pressed into interesting shapes on one side, and the horse book in her lap and the slightly confused expression of someone emerging from deep sleep in an unexpected location. She blinked at them. "Did I fall asleep?" "You did," Caleb said. She looked at the book. "Captain made it through the thunderstorm," she said. "I finished it." "How does it end?" Victoria asked. Rosie considered. "He finds his way home," she said. "He got lost for a long time, but he found his way." She said it the way she said most things. Directly, without ceremony, without any visible awareness of how it landed. Then she climbed off the couch and found her shoes, and that was that. Caleb looked at the ceiling for a moment. Victoria pressed her lips together. "She does that on purpose," Victoria said quietly. "I genuinely cannot tell anymore," he said. They locked up the garage together. The lights in the first bay, the second bay, the supply room, the front door last. He unplugged the coffee maker. Victoria turned off the office light. They bundled Rosie into her coat, half asleep again on her feet, and walked out into the February cold together. The street was empty and quiet. The lampposts still had their holiday lights, which the town had left up longer than strictly necessary, which was a thing Hallow Creek did, held on to warmth a little past when the calendar said to let go. Rosie walked between them without thinking about it, one hand in Caleb's, the other reaching sideways for Victoria's. Victoria took it. They walked the 3 blocks to Birch Street in the cold, the 3 of them, their breath making small clouds in the February air. It was ordinary. It was not nothing. It was, he thought, exactly what it had always been supposed to be. Not a fairy tale version of itself, not a clean resolution with the difficult parts edited out, but a real thing, with real weight, chosen fully by 2 people who understood precisely what they were choosing and chose it anyway. The hard-working man who stayed, and the woman who had to go and come back to understand what staying meant. Rosie, walking between them, said, "I want to name the hypothetical dog Gerald." "After the pigeon?" Victoria said. "Gerald is a strong name," Rosie said. "It works for multiple species." "We don't have a dog," Caleb said. "Not yet," Rosie said. Victoria looked at Caleb over the top of Rosie's head. He looked back. He had no argument. He'd had no real argument about any of this since October, which he was now prepared to acknowledge. He was a man who had spent 11 years in a particular kind of waiting and had come out of it into something he didn't have a word for except this specific Tuesday, this street, this child, this woman, this cold, this ordinary and irreplaceable life. He didn't need a word for it. He held Rosie's hand on one side and watched Victoria hold it on the other, and they walked the last block to the house with the light on the porch. And Caleb thought, this is the whole thing. This is what it was always going to be, on the other side of all of it. Not perfect, not without its difficulty and its history and its long gap in the middle that would always be part of the story. But his. Fully, finally, without reservation. His. He unlocked the front door. Rosie went in immediately, trailing her coat behind her, already negotiating